Today is a very important day at the main jewelry design corporation. The head of the project, Liu Neng, was congratulated on the final design and thunderous applause was heard from the participants. Our hero was also present at this event and happily broke away from the crowd, trying to see what exactly the headman had created. The man showed quite a few beautiful sketches, which depicted one ring, which looked simply amazing. From all sides, there is nothing to complain about. But the boy saw this and became very angry because it was his doing. He worked on them yesterday. The brunette pushed aside the people standing nearby and shouted at the man, proving that this was his project. Looking menacingly into everyone's eyes, the bald man only grinned in response, and looking at him intently, asked if he could prove it. The bespectacled man pointed his finger at the drawer under the computer and said that those papers were lying there because he himself had put them there. Besides, according to him, he had a lot of drafts, and he could show them without any problem. One of the guests grinned and, opening the drawer, did not see any of them, just like the others present here. Goosebumps ran across the boy's body. He couldn't understand where they had gone, and the audience began to laugh loudly. The old man approached him and smiled. No one believes that such a young boy is capable of creating such a large project because he is just an ordinary intern. Our hero gritted his teeth. He remembers how he worked whole nights on everything, and all for the sake of winning a prize at the exhibition. This is his only chance to cure his mother. Not far from this door stands a beautiful lady who is looking at herself in the mirror with interest and adjusting her luxurious hair. At one point, the girl heard someone's footsteps and asked what the noise was behind the door. The old man approached her and winked, saying that nothing special was happening there, justifying himself by saying that everyone had become very interested in looking at his sketches. The blonde suddenly seemed to glow and took the bundle of paper from his hands to examine it carefully, and it seemed that the girl really liked it. A smile began to appear on her face and she praised the old man for his excellent work. He, in turn, became embarrassed and thanked Director Chin for such pleasant words. But suddenly, a loud scream was heard behind him. Our hero literally flew into the door and menacingly tried to prove that he was the author of this project, on which he worked at night, saying that many had seen it and could confirm it. The guy started making excuses, saying that he really needed the prize to pay for his mother's treatment. And then there was a deathly silence. The bald man looked the director straight in the eye and declared that the intern was simply overworked and completely confused about everything, citing problems with his head and promised to fire him immediately. But before making such an important decision, the redhead approached him and offered to go with her to the office. Our hero agreed and went with this impudent man to her. A couple of minutes later, the guys had already arrived at the place. The brunette was still trying to prove that these were his sketches, almost losing his voice. His competitor looked him straight in the eye with a slight mockery. He couldn't believe that he would be able to redraw everything down to the smallest detail, and besides, it will be very difficult not to make mistakes in this project. But the bespectacled man insists on his own. And yet, the old man grins. It seems to him that anyone can easily copy what is already ready. At that moment, there was a loud knock on the table. The director doesn't care whose project it is. The most important thing to her is that it's really good. After these words, the brunette's body began to tremble. He cannot understand why everything turned out this way. He cannot prove who is right and who is wrong. And to make things fair, Chin decided to give Yuan Hong a chance, looking into his eyes with interest. After these words, the boy became quiet, but still asked what she meant. The old man also became wary. He didn't understand what this woman was planning. Looking them both in the eye, she suggested that in a few days they go shopping with me in another city, and whoever was the first to find the right stone and cut it would win a prize. The men froze in place and began to look nervously at each other. No one expected such a proposal. Of course, the imposter continued to ridicule the boy, because according to him, choosing the right thing is an art, and not everyone can do it. And at that moment, our hero's whole world seemed to collapse before his eyes. He didn't have the money to buy something like this, and his confidence began to fade. The girl smiled in response, explaining that the company would cover the costs, and now everyone could choose 3 stones. Everyone wants to prove what they are capable of, and of the two, the old man still holds the bar and hasn't lost confidence. After some time, their conversation ended. It had already started raining outside and it was getting dark, just in time for our hero to return home, and he quietly leaves the building. In the distance, through a light fog, he sees his girlfriend standing near the road, waiting for cars to pass so she can cross the road. Lien rushed straight to her and hugged her, telling her what a terrible day he had lived through today. With a heavy sigh, our hero shared with her how he had been set up today, and he was very glad that his love was next to him. At least something in his life was going well now. And at that very moment, the old man came out of the building and turned to Jia Rui, asking him to hurry up and called him to him. After his words, the girl hit our hero on the hand and rudely insulted him. The guy quickly let go of her hand. The girl ran to the imposter and hugged him. It seemed that she was more glad to see him, and not Yuan. The bespectacled man looks at her, and his hands are already starting to shake. Maybe she made a mistake. He needs to find out everything. His so-called beloved turns to him and giggles quietly. As it turns out, she betrayed him and went to Liu Neng, calling him the man of her dreams, and he only smiled in response. Tears appeared in the boy's eyes. He sighed heavily and swallowed the heavy lump in his throat. Looking at the sky, he does not understand why this world is so unfair to him. He returned home with a terrible feeling in his soul, but the next morning Yuan went to the hospital to see his mother. She was still lying in the ward in a serious condition. Our hero could not find the courage and determination to go there. He considers himself simply worthless, and that is why the brunette just stands and cries at the door. He is very sorry that he is unlikely to receive the prize, and will not be able to help her. And also his girlfriend whom he loved took and left him. His thoughts were interrupted only by the doctor's voice, which allowed the visitor to enter. Now is not the best time for tears. Our hero wipes them away and goes inside with a forced smile. As a caring son, he brought a small gift to his mother, namely fruits, to make her feel a little better. And the first thing Yuan did was ask about her condition. The woman took him gently by the hand and looked straight into his eyes, and the boy told her that he had a lot of work because he was now an intern. And of course, he lied to her about his supposedly high salary and many bonuses, so that she would not worry. Their pleasant conversation was interrupted by the doctor, who approached our hero. He asked them to step away for a while. It seemed they were about to have a serious conversation. The young people left the room, and our hero was handed some kind of paper. It seems that the attending physician is losing his nerve. This cannot go on any longer. There have been too many missed payments over the years, and if this happens again, the treatment will be suspended. The bespectacled man looked at the paper and read everything carefully. He understood what was happening here, and simply sighed heavily. Arriving home, he was completely distraught. Without even changing his clothes, Yuan scattered his bag and shoes around his bed and fell face down into the pillow. It hurts him to remember all of this, especially the trouble with his project, how he was set up, made to look like a fool, and how they appropriated someone else's property. Besides this, his love abandoned him, lying all this time that she loved him too. But in fact, she was devoted to some old man. And besides this, the risk that mom will not last long has increased many times over. It seems that nothing can be changed. It's really hard for him now. It seems like it would be better if he didn't exist at all, if all these problems wouldn't exist. For several minutes, Four Eyes was choking on tears, but suddenly he jumped up and wiped them from his eyes. He dropped to his knees and began rummaging through things on his nightstand. Having found the necessary thing, he decided to leave first before his mother, and mentally said goodbye to her. A small drop of blood fell on his book, and it glowed with a bright blue light. And yet, the boy did not succeed. He simply fell onto the bed. Before his eyes, everything seemed to change. He could not see anything. This strange light began to blind his eyes, and for 1 second he noticed strange characteristics of things around him. The brunette even flinched from such a strange vision. It was the first time he had seen something like this, and it seemed to him that he had gone crazy. A couple of seconds later, the guy jumped out of bed and decided to check it again. Touching the knife, the characteristics appeared in front of him again, where special skills, assessment, and general appearance were described. It seems that he himself did not understand what had happened and was very confused. And when he touched himself, the same thing happened. And yet, the boy decided to look at his hand and noticed a golden finger. It really did glow like real gold. Turning away, the bespectacled man glanced at the old family book and began to examine it carefully. It was covered in his blood. Suddenly, his finger begins to take on its former appearance and shape, and our hero watches everything closely. For a moment, Yuan noticed that they were talking about the basic techniques of Taishu and was at a loss. Some strange pattern appeared on his little finger, and specifically on this finger. All the others were the same as before. Looking to the left, the brunette decided to double-check everything that had just been seen in the video, and right in front of him was a knife. By gently touching the blade, he again recalled the information about it in his head, and this only works when he touches it with his little finger. All this looks very strange, but very interesting. The brunette looked at his palm and even rejoiced, because the thought dawned on him that he might have become a superhero and received superpowers. And finally, such a talentless and helpless guy gains confidence. This time he is sure that he will defeat that old man. Soon the three of them met. Director Chin's company had already called a plane especially for them, and they set off on their journey. A couple of hours of flight and they were already there, in the city of Nanyu. It is very famous for the mining of precious stones, and now this is their goal. His girlfriend suddenly ran out to her favorite. Jia screamed loudly and waved her hand joyfully. Our hero was now more interested in what this woman was doing here, and he simply stared at her. The traitor snorted in response and waved it off as if he shouldn't know about it. The old man hugged the girl and advised this loser to just have a good rest today before the big shame tomorrow. And after this happened, he promised to personally fire him. And Jia mockingly waved her hand at him goodbye. The brunette gritted his teeth and promised himself to show him what he was capable of, clutching his suitcase in his hand. The headmistress turned to him and declared that she didn't care at all about their personal feud, since it was much more important to her to look only at their abilities. Our hero promised to prove to her that he is worthy, that he is the author of that wonderful work, and that it cannot be otherwise. The headmistress sighed heavily and asked them to move on. First, they needed to go to the hotel, and then tomorrow morning to the stone market. The boys had a lot of work to do. But unfortunately, even here our hero is haunted by small but still misfortunes. This disgusting couple was settled right behind his wall, and he is already tired of hearing their cooing. Even despite this nightmare, our hero wants to at least calm down a little and go have some fun. Otherwise, he already has this feeling that he's going to go crazy soon. Yuan takes his phone out of his pocket and decides to take a walk along the road to the stone market to explore the area here. His GPS shows that it's literally a couple of minutes walk away. The company specifically chose this hotel to be close, but it seems to him that a shorter route would be much better. The only downside is that even in daylight, it is dark here. And even this doesn't scare him. Yuan still sees that he is broke. He really has nothing left, and it's worth the risk. As soon as our hero took a couple of steps, he heard a loud female scream around the corner, and he started to tremble. The brunette decided to quietly approach and eavesdrop on what was going on, even trying to breathe quietly so as not to be heard. It looks very much like two scoundrels were pestering the girl, demanding that she give up what was in her hand. The blonde tried to somehow defend herself and shouted at them not to come closer, but it seemed they didn't care at all. One of them came up and literally snatched away the little thing she was trying to protect. The girl threw herself at his feet and began to cry, begging him to return everything back, because it was this that would help cure her grandmother. The other scoundrels standing nearby began to mock her and stretch out their hands. But at that moment, our hero appears and kicks one of them. The bald man laughed nervously when he saw such an unexpected picture and mockingly asked who it was. Yuan rushed towards him at that very moment and punched him in the stomach with all his might, screaming loudly, but it seems to his regret, the guy turned out to be slightly weaker than him in physical strength, and the bandit was able to easily resist him by swinging his knee. The man began to come closer and closer, taking a knife out of his pocket. It was time to show this impudent fellow his place. Grimacing, he swung the blade at him, and Yuan looked at his hand at the time, not understanding why his finger wasn't working. It was a good thing that the bald man's friend ran up just in time and said that the police had arrived, and it was time to run away. Finally, he turned to our hero and asked him to take this as ordinary luck, and he himself began to run away as quickly as possible. When the two guys were out of sight, the victim began to slowly crawl towards Yuan, asking if he was okay. The brunette slowly got to his feet and picked up his phone from the ground. It was a good thing they managed to buy some time. As it turned out, our hero had managed to call the police here earlier. But before continuing the dialogue, he turned away and asked the girl to tidy herself up. The blonde blushed slightly and became confused, asking for forgiveness. She began to nervously straighten her tie on her shirt. And now, when the bespectacled man came to his senses, he remembered that little thing that was taken from her. The girl had been so worried about it, and he felt very sorry for her. Yuan looked straight into her eyes and saw only a smile. As it turned out, there was only a box, and there was a little secret in this matter. His girlfriend managed to hide it under her clothes and proudly took it out to show it off. It's an ordinary stone, it's not cut, it's of ordinary quality, and the boy became very interested in how much it costs. The girl continued to chatter further. As it turned out, her grandfather left it to her, saying that just in case she could sell it and get at least some money. As it turns out, her family is currently experiencing financial difficulties, and her grandmother has also fallen ill, like a vicious circle. Besides this, the girl knows perfectly well that somewhere here, there is a market, and she wants to sell it, and tears begin to flow from the realization of what almost happened just now. Our hero sighed heavily and simply asked to let him look at this thing. Wiping away her tears, the blonde finally agreed and handed him the small glass box. The boy took it in his hands, and as it turned out, it was a rather special thing, of the highest quality. And when Yuan found out that it was a jade cube, he was speechless. The girl jumped closer to him and in horror asked how he knew what kind of stone it was. The bespectacled man thought for a moment and explained that this jade press had been produced quite a few times. But this particular example was very well preserved, and if it came down to it, it could be sold for a pretty good price. At these words, his girlfriend's eyes lit up with joy, and she began to ask him in more detail how much money she could get for him. But in fact, it's not all that simple because on three sides, a black warrior in the form of a turtle with a snake instead of a tail is engraved, and on the other side, some master engraved a dragon. And it's worth noting that this work is simply of the highest quality. The smart guy suggests finding a shop and having the examination done right there. The girl looked around and said that she knew that there was definitely a store nearby. Without letting her finish, our hero smiled back at her and suggested that they go there quickly, since he still had things to do and didn't have time for all of this. Just as the green-eyed man was about to leave their meeting place, he felt a slight tug on his shirt. The girl grabbed his hand tightly and asked him to go with her, citing the fact that now, after everything that had happened, she was afraid to walk alone. Brunetta sighed heavily and still agreed. He had no choice. A couple of minutes later, the guys arrived at a ladies' antique shop to haggle. The friends looked into each other's eyes and opened the door together. Right in front of them sat a young lady pouring herself tea. Of course, the first thing she did was get down to business and ask whether her guests would be selling or buying anything. The blonde looked her straight in the eye with a smile and confidently declared that she would sell, and they allowed her to sit down next to her. Our hero and his friend have made themselves comfortable, and the shop owner is already preparing a treat for them. The two of them look at the tea leaves she's putting into their mug with confusion, and they are a little embarrassed. But their giggling was interrupted by the long-haired woman, who asked them to tell her what request they had come to her with. The bespectacled man took his mug and looked at her with a slight mockery. He couldn't believe that she didn't notice that she had only put tea leaves in there and nothing more. And even at this moment, our hero is about to check the mug with his finger, and it seems like nothing special. Even though it is of the highest quality, there is nothing special about it. It seems like all the things in this shop are like that. His girlfriend looked down at her small box and carefully placed it on the table, saying outright that she wanted to sell it. The shop owner began to examine it carefully. The jade cube was unlikely to be worth much. 20,000 at most, no more. Our hero initially found this madam suspicious. It seemed like she didn't understand such things at all, since she was lowering the price so much. The visitor was confused. Tears began to well up in her eyes. She said that this thing was given to her by her late grandfather, and her grandmother was in serious condition. Madame looked at her coolly, reminding me that she had come to me at the Charity Fund A in the antique shop. It looks like the young lady is not going to make any concessions, and she will have to accept what is. The boy looked the woman straight in the eyes and asked if she was the owner here, to which she nodded her head. Our hero repeated the same phrase and asked if she was even concerned about her reputation. The lady cried out in displeasure. It is clear that she is worried about this, but even despite this, she is going to buy a high-quality item at the price of a low-quality product, and such a person may not have the best opinion. The owner yelled back at the boy, declaring that this was a low-grade product because she was an expert and understood this and could not admit that she was mistaken. Yuan raised an eyebrow and folded his arms across his chest, asking to conduct a small experiment and compare. The girl looked at him with slight interest and asked what exactly he was going to do. At this moment, Uncle Gun enters the room. He heard these screams and indignation and decided to check what was going on here. The hostess began to grumble discontentedly. Well, pointing a finger at these two young people, she stated that these people clearly doubted her professional skills, which she was unhappy about. The old man smiled slightly. He knew that this young lady was strict in her conduct of affairs, but he loved her and wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to soften her arrogance. Now was a very opportune moment. He introduced himself as having extensive experience in the antiques business and offered the young people permission to judge them personally. The boys looked at each other and gave their consent, crossing their arms over their chests. But in any case, the presenter will need to prepare, even though some people don't really like it. The old man brought the jewels on a tray covered with a light cloth and asked who would be first. Before starting, the man asked the guys not to worry, as this is a competition to restore justice and nothing more. But of course, everything has its conditions. The young people looked at him with interest and asked what exactly he was talking about. Having cleared his throat, the grandfather reminded that the hostess was a young lady and the young man was a guest. And in fact, she had the advantage. Besides, she was familiar with all the goods. It would be logical to assume, as Yuan did, that this is all unfair, and Madame completely agrees with him. The old man suggested that everyone could touch the thing only through the fabric, and only then give an answer that would come from the heart. The guys had no objections and they agreed to these conditions. The grandfather lowered his head and gave the lady the right to start the task first. She only looked at him slightly confused and lowered her gaze. The long-haired girl quietly approached the table and looked closely at the object. For some reason, her intuition told her that this was not the right thing at all, and Madame became wary. Looking up, the shop owner sighed heavily and declared that now everything had become absolutely clear to her, having made her choice. The old man smiled slightly and gave the young man the right to act. Our hero adjusted his glasses and began to carefully examine the object. Now he has his finger, and now, the most important thing is that his cunning plan works. The boy approached the table and put his left hand to his cape, in anticipation of winning. But surprisingly, Yuan felt absolutely nothing. It seems that his power is not working now. The old man noticed that he had felt something and asked what exactly. The bespectacled man opened his eyes and was slightly confused, trying to collect all his thoughts. The grandfather interrupted him and said, laughing, that now he should give up his seat to the lady and he would speak second. The shopkeeper folded her arms and announced that she had touched the Song Dynasty porcelain fish and also gave a suggested price. Our hero cleared his throat and stated in a calm voice that she was definitely wrong. The girl snorted at him in response and asked what he had found out and could say now. Looking at the fabric again, he confidently declared that in front of them was a plastic toy in the shape of a fish. The shop owner continues to resist and says that this is definitely some kind of treasure, not a trinket. Uncle Gun's words cannot be empty words. But the boy continues to stand his ground and does not give in. He is sure that this is definitely a toy, but not something important. The lady stomped her foot on the floor and asked the man to quickly remove the fabric and show the final result. He adjusted his mustache and removed the sheet. In front of them was indeed a toy fish, of no value to them. The long-haired girl looked at this and was very surprised. She couldn't believe that she could have made such a mistake. But the old man was amazed by our hero's skills. He couldn't believe that he was such a newbie, but he could sense that it was a fake. The bespectacled man scratched his nose and simply said that he didn't know how to comment on it, in order to keep his words to himself. Our hero's new girlfriend just stood nearby and listened to everything. She was amazed at how smart he was and how pleasant he looked. And does she really still believe in her abilities after everything that just happened? It seems not. She turned away and blushed. Finally, Yuan gave her advice to train more and try harder, and then perhaps she would become a real mistress. But not now. And now? It's time for the guys to go. The brunette turned to his friend and said that their consultant didn't understand the products. They needed to look for a much more reliable place. The old man turned to this dishonest woman and, sighing heavily, said that the boy was indeed very talented. His skills could be useful to them. The friends silently turned towards the exit, but they were stopped. The owner felt awkward and began to justify herself by saying that she was simply confused and offered to give her a chance to look at the item again and give a new price. The boys agreed, and even the old man began to examine it carefully. This jade cube turned out to be truly valuable, and the engraved dragon clearly proved that they were looking at a high reward. Madame couldn't believe how she had saved herself from making such a mistake, and a slight blush of embarrassment appeared on her face. And yet she should admit that she is guilty before these young people, and promised the girl that she would buy it at the highest price if she was interested in selling. The blonde smiled back at her, and of course she agreed. But our hero is already bored. It seems that the problem has been solved, and now it's time for him to go about his business. The brunette turned around and headed for the exit, but the girls tried to stop him in confusion. When our hero left the room, he immediately saw two familiar faces upon exiting. The bullies, who dared to attack the defenseless girl. The bald man even flinched when he saw the boy and gritted his teeth. But Yuan was seriously scared and pretended not to know him, trying to explain that the guys might have made a mistake. The brunette started to run away from this street as quickly as possible, but the bald one seemed to want to teach him a lesson and was going to catch up. At that very moment, an old man appeared, who had seen the whole picture from the window and was not afraid to ask what this young man was allowing himself to do now. The bully with the scar on his head even flinched from his stern intonation and froze in place. These two scoundrels fell down before the grandfather and began to ask for forgiveness, trying to justify themselves by saying that they did not notice that they were standing near his shop. The old man turned to the owner and asked what to do with them now, how to punish them. It seems that the girl does not want to deal with them and therefore decides to forgive them and let them go. But our hero was confused by the fact that he showed himself to be weak, saying that he was afraid of these bullies and came up with an excuse that he supposedly had the electricity left on in the house. Madame turned to Uncle Gong, ignoring Yuan, saying that she still decided to take pity this time, but on the condition that their hand would not be raised against others. The bespectacled man has a slightly different opinion, and he would like to break their arms. The shop owner even shuddered at his intonation, but our hero is not going to take his words back and is seriously ready to take such a step. The two fell to the floor and started shouting that they would return the box only if they were spared. The boy with the mohawk ran up to Grandpa Lee and began to personally ask him for forgiveness. The old man took the little thing that he had given him and looked at the owner, but she still stopped him and asked him to listen to him further. The bald man was already choking with tears and begged them not to break his arms, and almost kissed his feet. Our hero was sitting at the table, holding a cup of tea with one hand. He was already starting to get irritated by these tea leaves, and he was muttering something under his breath. At that moment, an old man comes in and declares that this thing was given to them by those bad guys. The brunette looked at his new acquaintance and shoved the box at her so that she could take it for herself. But for some reason the blonde refused, deciding to give him a supposed gift and give him this little thing. Her friend interrupted her and immediately refused, because he would not be able to repay her for her help, and let her at least have this box. The young lady was confused and said directly that she would also like to return the favor to him, but she became embarrassed and ran away without finishing. The boy sighed heavily and looked away with displeasure. He took the box in his hands and began to examine it carefully. As it turned out, it was magical. Although of a low grade, its characteristics were truly very interesting. The shop owner saw his displeased face and asked if everything was okay. The bespectacled man calmly replied that everything was fine. Opening it, slightly moving the lid, Yuan noticed transparent smoke beginning to emerge from it. Our hero was confused and began to look at it closely to understand what it was in front of him. The old man and the girl were also wary, but did not understand what was happening. It looks like only Yuan can see what's in front of him now, the smoke that's heading towards his finger. But as for those two hooligans, if you break their arms, all they will be able to do for the rest of their lives is sweep the streets. As soon as the boy thought about this, strange silhouettes began to appear in his eyes, clearer than he had seen before. It seems that something has happened to his vision. He can feel his soul being filled with power, and he begins to see objects much more clearly. The brunette looked at those two guys and realized that his eyes were fine now, although a couple of seconds ago there was smoke in that place. Uncle Gong smiled at the young lady and said that although the boy was modest, he had a magnificent ability, and they were very sorry that he did not work with them. At that moment, Madame realizes that she treated him very unfairly and offers to get to know Yuan again, calling herself Zheng Ruju. Our hero felt awkward that he didn't have a business card, but in any case, they are now very good friends, and if anyone needs help, they can easily turn to each other. The brunette smiled and thanked her and the old man for the introduction. However, tomorrow, he has some things to do that cannot be postponed, and therefore he is going to leave right now and take care of them. Of course, the shop owner has another matter that concerns those two idiots. And of course, the boy is not going to forgive them, because people who do evil must be punished. Uncle Gong looked after him. He really thinks he is a very good person, very similar to him in his youth. But it seems that Jojo has a generally bad opinion of him, completely the opposite. On his way home, the boy kept looking with interest at this interesting little box, which made it much easier for him to walk with. However, even despite this, he can't shake the thought of what this is. The brunette decided to go back and talk to them, since the jade market had been closed for a long time. He turned in the opposite direction and walked on with a proud gait. Meanwhile, he was being followed by some strange guy who reported to the unknown person that the madam had found some guy as an assistant. Meanwhile, some strange changes continued to occur in our hero's body, as if his body was moving on its own and not listening to him. It seemed that the exchange of souls had not had the best effect on him. When the boy came home, he began to examine this box. Despite the fact that it was the first time he had encountered such an assessment, and despite the fact that it was not high, the box gives him normal advantages. Thoughts began to creep into his head that most likely this finger gives not only the ability to understand things in jewelry, but also some other things that he still doesn't know about. But as for that antique shop, he thinks that right now it would be the best decision not to break ties with it. It will definitely be useful to him in the future. Now was the time to rest. Yuan lay down comfortably on the bed and fell asleep with a smile, hoping that tomorrow he would find something special at the market. The next morning, the guys had already gathered in the right place. Our hero had slept well, and now it was time to explore the jade market, and it seemed that it looked completely different from what the brunette could have expected. Seeing his surprised expression, the old man began to laugh at him along with that trader, saying that he had never been in crowded places. Gritting his teeth, our hero asked them to mind their own business and to take better care of themselves. The headmistress herself is starting to get angry at these frivolous people, and she yelled at them, informing them that she holds two cards. The one that belongs to our hero has only 10,000, but the one that belongs to Liu has as much as 50. Hearing this, Yuan shouted at Qin, claiming that even the very beginning of the test had already proven unfair. It feels like they are in cahoots, and you shouldn't expect anything normal anyway. The fat man turned to our hero and said with a laugh that he had better give up now, admitting that he had screwed up. The brunette approached the headmistress and asked why she did this. The girl glanced at him and said calmly that she had only promised him a chance, not justice. And since she was an entrepreneur, she chose the path of maximization and profit. Handing him the card, she decided to check again whether he would accept it. The guy swallowed the big lump in his throat, but still decided to take on this matter. In this world, everything will not be so simple. He seems to be taking too long to think about it. Madame sighed heavily and said that since the decision had already been made, she was taking away his chance. The brunette snatched it from her hand and said that he would not allow himself to be treated like some kind of trash. In any case, our hero considers himself stronger because he was given his finger from above, and when he uses it to evaluate stones, then they may no longer stutter about justice. The headmistress wanted to tell him something, but she received an important call and she nervously picked up the phone. She also has her own family problems, and now the issue of divorce from her husband is being decided, and she does not want to see or hear from him anymore, just break up without negotiations. To which the brunette smiled in response, insisting that they still talk, because despite the fact that she is now in charge of everything, they are connected by marriage. But it seems that Jing is little interested in this. Her boyfriend still continues to put pressure on her, citing the fact that he has money, and he announced 1,000,000 yuan as the final price. The long-haired woman rudely turned him down. He shouldn't get anything, and she herself is only going to talk to his lawyer. The man asked her not to show her hysterics now, because he was also at the jade market at the moment and right behind her. He ran up and grabbed her by the shoulder, causing Madame to scream. It seemed they should talk after all. Meanwhile, our hero is already at the market of fortune, where wealth and poverty are intertwined. He must definitely find the stone he needs here. The boy walked between the rows for a long time and noticed one man who was selling a stone that attracted him. The one with a translucent and smooth exterior, it would probably suit him. The bald man spoke to Yuan and began to praise his product, telling about its characteristics. But our hero calmly approached and said that before making a purchase, he needed to touch it to decide whether he really needed it. And it's very good that he decided to check it out. This cobblestone is ordinary jadite and completely useless. Suddenly, an old man appears behind him along with his ex-girlfriend and continues to escalate the situation, saying that he has supposedly already chosen him and that he is in good condition, trying to confuse the boy. Gritting his teeth, the brown-eyed man said that he was still only studying, but was not making hasty decisions. The bald man looks at him with a smile and seems to be about to spend a considerable sum of money on these two useless stones. And at that moment, our hero seemed to wake up and began to beg the owner not to sell him such a thing, intending to be the first to buy it. But then Neng doubles the price and takes out a card, and it looks like the boy has no choice. The old man calmly takes the largest stone and walks away from here with a cocky smile. The brunette sat down and looked at him from his side, wondering what a vile opponent he had encountered. As soon as he was about to leave, the owner of the shop stopped him and thanked him for raising the price so much because this stone was worth much less. Our hero refused the monetary reward, and that is why the man kindly offered him his other goods. As soon as the brunette touched him, he immediately saw that, even though he lacked any special skills, he already had at least some value. It looks like this is exactly what the boy was looking for. He is completely jaded without any impurities. The man noticed that the young guy was looking at him, and if what you had wasn't to his liking, he could easily give him another one. Yuan laughed and refused, and thanked him for his kindness, saying that he liked everything. Besides this, at the end, the kind seller said that he would be glad to see him again to choose another interesting stone for him. Our hero began to examine it with a smile. Even though it was uncut and had a very low rating, this did not frighten him, because after it the rating would definitely increase. He still had that money left, and also had the opportunity to consider some other minerals, but he decided to put aside what he could earn for his mother's treatment. After Hong returned from the jade market, he thought that it would be difficult to find other rough stones with a rating higher than 2 stars. And it was indeed a very difficult task, but he managed to do it. Now he needs to go to the stone processing laboratory to find out what can be carved from them. As soon as he entered, he immediately saw a large crowd of painfully familiar people surrounding him. That fat man and his girlfriend were there and had already put their stones on a tray. The other guests also seemed to be against our hero and began to mock him for bringing some kind of trash. Of course, the boy felt a little offended. He heard everything, but he still doesn't intend to back down. Neng jokingly offered to help him with the project or to help make the security, and his madam stood nearby and laughed. Our hero approached Director Liu and asked that the stones be processed simultaneously to see what would happen next and to make sure everything was fair. The bald man laughed and said that this was a very honest laboratory, and that a supposedly dishonest person like him would not be able to collect anything here. One man from the crowd expressed his opinion that since the clients trust them, then let them bring stones. Many other guys got up from their seats and began to carry out their minerals on trays. The old man looked at our hero with a mocking look, threatening that now the whole truth would come out and he would be fired, and the others present supported him. Half an hour later, the cutting was already completed, and the presenter asked to inform the customers about this. Mr. Nang stepped forward and decided to speak first, pushing his opponent with his shoulder. When the sheet was lifted, people saw that there was a medium-sized stone in front of them, and it immediately became clear that the young boy would lose. Meanwhile, a smile appeared on our hero's face. He didn't expect that it would be just some green jadeite. It even looked funny. The bald man proudly raised his head and now demanded that Yuan take his step. It was time to get moving and show what he was capable of. He adjusted his glasses and turned to the two scoundrels. He doesn't say that he is an excellent expert in this matter, and therefore it will not be surprising if it just turns out to be a simple cobblestone. The man removed the sheet and everyone saw an identical-looking stone. It looks like this is also a green jadeite, and it is in no way inferior to that green one. But because of its size, it is probably more expensive. The old man gritted his teeth. He couldn't believe how this was possible. His rival chose a real stone, but it was most likely just luck. Our hero decided to tease him about how he had miscalculated and chosen a less valuable stone. But the bald man yelled at him and demanded that he take the crown off his head, since there were still 2 rounds left. The boys approached the judge, and she gave the order to open the next game. Yuan was the first to do this, and everyone present was very surprised when they saw a real spinel. Its value is truly quite enormous. But when Neng showed his, the hall burst into laughter. It was ordinary low-grade jadite, and no one here would be of any use to it. And at that very moment, his self-esteem began to crumble. His girlfriend came up to him and hugged him, to at least somehow support him. And yet, even despite this outcome, he is not going to retreat. But he still cannot understand how that last stone that he snatched from the hands of his opponent turned out to be not so useful. He couldn't believe that a cobblestone with a 1-star rating could cost almost $500,000, making the game even more interesting. The bald man gritted his teeth and reached out for his next stone, but his girl asks him not to place bets, since she already doubts their victory. And at that moment, her lover hits her hard in the chest so that she does not interfere with him right now. The boy seemed to be tired of this cooing and decided to propose a bet, looking intently into her eyes. He turned to him and rudely asked what his point was. The bespectacled man looked him straight in the eye and offered that if he won, he would give him $5 million, which was just enough to ruin him. And only now, the man understands what a serious opponent he has come across, because he himself does not have that kind of money. Madame rose to her feet and asked him not to get involved in this. He pushed her away from himself again and asked, "What will happen if Yuan loses?" The young man agreed to give his life into his hands. That is, he would be able to dispose of him as he wished. It seems that the spectators appreciated this gambling game. They came across a rather brave young man today, and it was even interesting to watch, and Neng fell for it, because he was confident in his victory, and that this boy would become his living toy, so he naturally agreed. The judge looked at them and smiled, because they had concluded they needed a contract and asked them to put their signatures on the papers. The guys approached the table and looked at each other sideways with slight grins as they signed the contract. The judge smiled, and now, after they had done this, he gave them permission to open their stones. Before removing the sheet, the bald man looked at his opponent and laughed, telling him not to blame him for this decision. And then the fabric is torn off, and a look of confusion appears on Neng's face, and he simply freezes in place. Other people started laughing at him. He was just a dud, a simple empty breed. And now it became clear that he had lost. As for our hero, he has the most valuable type of jadeite. People have not seen such excellent stones for a very long time. Many began to come closer. And indeed, emerald silk was in front of them now, the rarest thing that could ever happen. The old man gritted his teeth and was at a loss. He couldn't imagine how such an inexperienced boy could get his hands on such an expensive stone. The brunette approached him and said directly that Mr. Liu had lost, and now he owed him a large debt. Clenching his fists, Neng looked him straight in the eyes with anger. Now he would definitely remember him for the rest of his life. Out of anger, he even threw the table, and many people jumped aside to avoid getting hit too. Now, his plans were simply to escape. The old man rushed towards the exit as fast as he could, pushing aside the people standing around him. Well, the young guys who run much faster than him and have much more endurance caught him in a couple of seconds and deftly laid him on the floor. Our hero gave them orders not to let him escape. Others even began to admire his incredible intelligence. The judge reassured him. Since Liu signed the contract, he definitely won't run away, and there's no need to worry about that. And besides, as it turned out, the new people he had just met would help him repay the debt in every possible way. And of course, the boy was delighted. It is immediately worth noting his amazing intelligence, and the judge offered to let him be their representative in the sale of the stone he found for only 20% of the proceeds. If you think about it, the deal is really profitable. With such a stone, the profit will be handsome, and these guys will definitely not worry about the loss, and they will also provide him with security. Yuan smiled and agreed, but he would like to sell the other two minerals with their help, since getting into trouble is not in his plans. The men shook hands, and eventually the guys agreed that our hero would be given an advance payment of 5 million. The amount was quite large, which surprised the boy a little, but he still agreed. Meanwhile, the old man continued to lie on the floor and grumble, blaming others for allegedly deceiving him. After it was all over, Yuan turned to his new friend and asked how they could help him. The man smiled and said that there were too many options here, including assets, apartments, gold, other valuables, and they had their own channels for everything. His colleagues began to take away the expensive bags from this lady who was with him, and she, in tears, begged him to give her everything back. Yuan shared his phone number with his colleague, so that when the time came, he could calmly call him and discuss the details of the deal. And finally, our hero approached this scoundrel who so wanted to beat him, and reminded him that he owed him a debt. He lay on the ground and continued to threaten that he would never get away from him, to which the brunette only snorted and left. At that very moment, his ex-girlfriend runs up and hugs him by the hand with a trembling voice. She tries to bring him back to her, saying sweet words, seeing what a successful and smart young man he is. And of course, after what she did, he doesn't want to touch her, let alone even look at her. Our hero pulls his hand away and hits her in the face. Tears began to well up in her eyes, and the guy told her directly that he was sick of her because he truly loved her, and she behaved simply terribly. There is no point in talking to her any further. The boy simply leaves, and the lady remains on the floor, choking on tears. Now the boy has his own big worries. He has a golden finger, and now there is no point in thinking about money. He is sure that his mother will get better. In his joy, he wants to call Mrs. Qin and tell her directly that he is quitting. Even though she is not the best person, he still appreciates her help. Soon the phone rang and someone picked up the phone, but just as Yuan Hong was about to say something, he heard loud screams and even shuddered. She was kidnapped, and miraculously she was able to answer the phone to ask for at least some help from someone. Our hero was confused and began to ask where she was, but she herself did not know, in some strange abandoned house. And it seemed that not by herself. Yuan heard a rough male voice nearby. Qin is in great danger, and even though the brown-eyed man doesn't have any warm feelings for her, he still can't leave her in this state. The phone was hung up, and at that moment, the boy hears someone's quiet steps and slowly raises his head. In front of him are Miss and Mrs. Tseng. They look very happy to see him, but also don't understand why he looks so scared. The brunette decided to get straight to the point. Showing the phone, he said that his director had been kidnapped and he himself did not understand anything, but the situation was really quite serious. The old man began to find out the details in order to better understand what had happened, and the only thing that Madame managed to say was her location. And since she had been at work since the morning, they could not take her far. As it turns out, the Jade Market is currently undergoing scheduled renovations, and there are a lot of abandoned buildings. It's obvious that she's hidden in one of them. The old man called his friend and demanded that he bring his people here as soon as possible. It's very good that you have connections with their family. Yuan sincerely thanked them for their help. But he himself could not sit idly by either, and he hastily said goodbye to them and asked them to inform him if anything became known, and he himself would go looking for her. Our hero threw her a piece of paper with his phone number so that they could contact her at any time. The girl opened the piece of paper and read a very sweet quote, under which his mobile number was written at the bottom. She even had a little tear in her eye. Meanwhile, Yuan began to burst into every door of the abandoned building, trying to attract attention with his shouts. The search task is quite difficult. He checked almost all the houses but did not find anyone, and he is already starting to panic. And Mrs. and Mr. Tseng have already gathered their people, and then they are ordered to conduct searches to find the young lady. The girl showed everyone her photos so that they would know what to look for and who to look for. Such a matter could not be postponed. The man came closer to her and said that he understood that she liked our hero, and she was taking the opportunity to help him and strengthen their relationship. This made the girl feel embarrassed, justifying herself by saying that she would have helped even an ordinary friend in such a situation. She really does look like her mother, but she really doesn't like it when someone talks about her and immediately becomes rude. The bespectacled man was confused and promised in a trembling voice that this would not happen again. Meanwhile, Ju's husband was already next to her, and for some reason was setting up a video camera. It is clear that now, in case she refuses to talk to him, he has a backup plan. He will shake money out of her in a very unusual way, and it seems that he doesn't care at all even about the fact that he is now breaking the law, and these empty threats from a little girl do not frighten him. He began to treat her much more rudely, so much so that tears began to well up in her eyes. And finally, the brunette approached her, and with a grin asked if she would give him money or continue to stand her ground. Madame fell silent and simply choked on tears, looking straight at him. It seemed that he was not going to take pity on Ju even today. Hatred was simply burning in his eyes. Even though she found herself in such a situation, she still does not stop retreating. She would rather say goodbye to her life than pay even a penny to a person like him. It is clear that if she gives him a little, he will not stop and the extortion will continue, and no one knows until when. Our hero comes to the rescue just in time. He heard the screams and was able to determine the place where they are. Now it's time to deal with him. The brunette immediately saw his director's husband and hit him hard in the face, causing the girl to scream. She certainly didn't expect to see Yuan here, but deep down she was very glad that at least someone came to her aid. The boy carefully took off his shirt and gave it to the girl. She would find it much more useful now than he would. The man became even more aggressive and rushed to hit the young man, and he succeeded. He hit him hard on the head, so hard that the boy fell to the ground. The villain climbed onto him and began to swing his fist at our hero. It was a good thing that Yuan managed to react and counterattack him, grabbing his other hand. Now our hero is not the same as he was before. He is not a weakling, not a wimp, but can stand up for himself and help others. While Chin's husband was regaining consciousness, Yuan handed the victim's phone and forced her to call the police. And he himself will hold back the attacker for now. He grabbed him by the shirt and pressed him against the wall. The brunette looked him straight in the eyes. He didn't care at all who was standing in front of him now. He was most interested in the purpose for which he attacked the girl, but he certainly didn't expect to hear that this scoundrel was her husband. But Madame confirmed everything. Usati kicked him in the stomach. He really doesn't like people who dare to interfere in someone else's family and life. And now Yuan has a lot of questions in her head about how to punish him, because this is her family's personal matter, and she herself stands to the side and covers herself with her shirt, asking him to continue hitting him, because she is still divorcing him, especially after he wants to use her for blackmail to extort money. The boy's heart sank from such horror. He couldn't believe that such a worthless person was standing in front of him now. Jumping to the side, he grabbed his chest, of course. He had taken a lot of hits, and he wouldn't last long. The young guy was finding it hard to breathe, but there was no time to be distracted by the pain. The man took out a knife and said directly that he didn't need anything except money. He swung the blade and looked Yuan straight in the eyes with a sharp gaze. It was a great mistake for him to interfere with his family. A second later, the two of them collided. The boy grabbed him with his bare hand, and his blade stuck right into his hand. It seems that this did not stop our hero in any way. If someone likes to stick their nose where it doesn't belong, then they should be ready to get what they deserve for it. The man fell to the floor and a huge hematoma began to appear on his face, and it appeared that he was unconscious. His now ex-wife ran up to our hero and hugged him tightly, tearfully thanking him for his help. If it weren't for him, who knows what would have happened next? Just in time, the guys arrived who agreed to help them search for the abandoned building they needed. One of their people burst through the door and told the commander that they were all here. The old man and his assistants entered the door and began to examine everyone present around. The first thing he did was approach our hero, who gave the order to bring that scoundrel to the police station. Because committing any kind of indecent acts against a girl, as well as a deliberate attempt on her life, must be punishable by law, Uncle Gong smiled at him and ordered his men to grab him and call the police, who immediately began to carry out his orders. After everything that happened, Yuan and Lady Qin went to her office and she told him how the old man had disgraced himself. Having learned about all this that happened, the headmistress was in shock. She could not even imagine that he was such a terrible person, and now it became clear who stole the project from the intern. The brunette smiled awkwardly and asked her not to worry about it. And now he proudly declared that he wanted to quit. The girl jumped up from her chair and asked why he wanted to do it like that, and promised that she would appoint him to the position of Nan right then and there, out of turn. But our hero insists on his own. He doesn't need this because he won't be able to keep the secret about his golden finger. The long-haired woman looked down. It seemed that he was very offended by her, and it was worth her admitting that she really didn't treat people at work very well. This time, Yuan didn't try to calm her down and simply said goodbye to her with a smile and closed the door behind him. But when he went outside, he was able to take a deep breath. Now it was time for him to return home and also cure his mother. Suddenly, he was stopped for a second by a phone call from Dr. Chen, who was treating her. The young man Gordo answered him and asked him not to remind him about all the payments because he had found the money and would make the payment right away. But unfortunately, this is no longer necessary. The man calls him to tell him the news that his mother is no longer showing signs of life, after which tears began to well up in his eyes. The boy can't believe that this happened like this and asked the doctor not to joke like that. But it seems that from his intonation you can hear that this is not a joke at all. After these words, he could not hold back his tears. The boy literally started to have hysterics. He threw the phone out of his hands. Just at that moment, a very good friend of his came out and found him in this state. Mrs. Tang spoke to him in a quiet and gentle tone. She heard everything and asked him to cry if he needed to now. The brunette simply silently approached her and hugged her tightly, and the girl reciprocated. Just then, Madame Chin came to the door and found him in such a state that he was crying and helplessly hugging an unknown young lady. The long-haired woman looked at them, and at that moment 2 men appeared behind her and asked her permission to go further. Madame was confused and turned back nervously. It seemed she was blocking the way. When one of the guys saw her, he even adjusted his glasses to get a better look. It seems that over the course of all this time, she has become an incredible beauty in his eyes. Our hero's former headmistress turned away sharply. She felt disgusted when people like him looked at her so intently. After that, she simply turned around and left, and the bespectacled man ordered his subordinate to find all the details about her. Having gone a little further, they saw Yuan together with Mrs. Tseng, in which they were standing and still hugging. The bald man looked at his boss and said that it looked like she was the girl they had been looking for. The bespectacled man took off his glasses and smashed them on the ground in anger, staring at them intently. The woman continued to calm him down, trying to somehow support and encourage the young man. The man ran up to the two and swung his leg at our hero. It looked like she was his girlfriend and he wouldn't stand for what he just saw. The brunette managed to stop him with one hand and nervously asked who he was. A subordinate of the bespectacled man ran to his defense and hit Yuan Hong quite hard in the face. The boy jumped back and, rubbing his face, asked who they really were. The enraged man still hadn't given his name, but he made it clear that since he had his eye on his girlfriend, he had to pay for his actions. Our hero pointed his finger at him and asked in surprise if he was her boyfriend, while Madame herself stood there in confusion. The girl looked at our hero and screamed that she would never even look at someone like him. Madame walked closer to Yuan and stood in his defense in front of him. Even though Gao Duyan is the heir of the Gao family, it is very rude to hang noodles on people's ears. He only smirked in response. Zhou should slow down now. He reminded her that her family wanted a certain share of the business in the market that belonged to his family, and she should remember what he talked about with her father. The girl took the brown-eyed man by the hand and led him in a completely different direction. She didn't want to sink to that level with him, but it seems they won't be given a pass so easily. His subordinate stood in their way, folding his arms across his chest and looking intently at her. The long-haired woman turned to Gao and asked in a loud voice what he wanted from her, since this was the Southern Jade Market, not the Mogao Market. It seemed that this man heard how close she was to him, which is why he came here to discuss something, and our hero only raised an eyebrow. The bespectacled man looked at his subordinate and demanded that Yuan be brought to him as quickly as possible. The bald man was right next to him in an instant. It seemed that his opponent was very fast, and even if the boy's finger somehow helped him, he would not be able to dodge. After that, he walked towards the old man, intending to hit him, but Tot grabbed his hand and was able to hold him back, since he is a champion in hand-to-hand combat in the wushu technique. He definitely did not expect this. The mustachioed man instantly threw him aside. Although he was old, his grip on the hand was quite strong. There were marks on his arm from the pressure, and it looked like they wouldn't go away that easily. It was a good thing that Uncle Gong came to the rescue in time to remind Heir Gao of the dispute between their families so that he would not break his promise. But he continued to stand his ground. He remembers everything perfectly well. There is no need to remind him. According to him, it is their family that wants to break the promise. And that is why Zhou will only be his wife. Baldy, let me remind you that if Gao loses, then the Tseng family will get a part of the market that they need for their business. And they definitely cannot allow that. The mustachioed man approached our hero and the girl, telling them that they were now facing a local rich man, and that he was accompanied by a champion in hand-to-hand combat. Almost no one could resist them. The girl crossed her arms over her chest and told how they attacked his friend, but he fought back. It seemed that she was very angry at these two scoundrels, but it seems that right now it doesn't matter at all. The boy is more interested in the dispute that his friend was talking about. Madam lost herself in conversation and said that this concerns the Jianbao meeting. The South Jade Market and the Mogao Market organized it. Our hero looked at them with slight bewilderment. It seems he doesn't know about it, and that it is held every few years between two markets. The old man said that high-ranking people gather here, and countless antiques from both ordinary people and professionals are exhibited. And here the whole point is that in the Southern Jade, their family is the best in sales. However, in order to work on other platforms, they need the support of influential people. And Gao Duan is the heir who rules Mogao. Now everything falls into place. It's no wonder that the bodyguard and their heir are the champion bully. This man had long had his eye on their miss, and that is why she acted as a bet with the submission of the gentleman. And if they win during the meeting, then their shop will be entitled to a share of the Mogao market under their protection. As Gong said, the boy looked at him with interest and asked, "How can one win under such conditions?" As it turns out, during the meeting, each participant receives identical chips and exchanges them for the items on display. And the person who receives the most expensive item wins. The problem here is that they can only afford to trust two appraisers, while the others may secretly be working for their rival's family. Obviously, in this situation, there is no point in talking about any kind of justice here. Madame Tseng herself despises her father because he put her happiness on the line, and that is why she opened a shop in such a remote place. Old man already knows very well, along with her, about what happened at the market today, and would also like to hint at help from Yuan. Before he could even finish speaking, our hero had already agreed. His golden finger should be useful in this situation. All this will take place next Wednesday, according to the bespectacled man, who is going to book a hotel near the Mogao market. After their pleasant conversation, our hero smiled at them one last time and said goodbye, waving his hand. But who would have thought that such a short conversation could change the opinion about our hero? The long-haired girl approached Uncle Gun and said that she really liked him now with a smile on her face. After such a meeting, our hero needs to go to his mother's grave. He brought her flowers, and he himself looks at two suicide letters. A very good friend of his gave them to him. One belongs to him, and the other to his father. And after that, the boy had an idea that perhaps his dad was alive. The brunette promised himself that now he would definitely find him and left the cemetery. Now that he has money, he can safely help the Cheng family and return to his normal duties as a student. Well, just as he was about to go up to his apartment, he saw his friend who, for some reason, was sleeping under the door. Xiaohua sat motionless. Yuan decided to come closer to her and ask what happened to her. The girl was very happy to see him, but he looked at her in confusion and did not understand what was happening. She hugged him so tightly that he fell to the floor. She was very glad to have found him again. The guys hadn't seen each other for quite a while, and the brunette had already forgotten who she was. Suddenly, unexpectedly for the boy, she began to cry, because her mother said that he was no longer alive, and that is why she specially came here to see him with her own eyes. Our hero hugged her back, and it turns out that besides his mother, there are other people who worry about him. Since she had a slight cold, he invited her to his place and gave her some hot tea. But he himself sat and looked at the mess in his house. He was even ashamed. The girl smiled back at him. She was his friend after all, and wouldn't judge him for something like that. But she couldn't even imagine how much trouble he had been through during all this time. Yuan stroked her head and asked her not to worry about it. But in the evening, he had a plane, and he needed to go to the Mogao market. But the girl should already be going home. But suddenly, she began to grumble that she did not want to go there, but wanted to stay with her friend, which even made him shudder. The long-haired girl hugged him and told him directly that she ran away from home because her parents did not understand her at all. The guy thought this decision was absurd and asked her why she did it. As it turned out, it was all because of him, to fulfill his promise. The brunette was confused and did not immediately understand what she was talking about. And Xiaohua folded her hands on her chest and said that they were engaged. And here's the thing. The boy didn't expect this. He didn't even know that they had something so close. As it turned out, she was talking about childhood, how they were still little and went for walks with their mothers. And they watched the children and laughed. The girl was Boyka, and the two of them wanted her to become his son's bride. Yen immediately remembered this situation and asked if he had made a mistake. His girlfriend has already started yelling at him that his mother allegedly personally told him that he would really marry her in the future. It's hard to believe that he changed his mind. Our hero calmed her down and simply said that perhaps she was doing all this too hastily. And besides, she just ran away from home. The girl was already starting to choke on tears and went to the window, saying that this would be the end of it if he changed his mind. In any case, she already considers herself useless to anyone, even to him. And it is better for her to act this way. Yuan grabbed her hand tightly, not letting her finish, and asked her not to do anything stupid. He also promised that she would stay with him. But about marriage, she still needed to think about it. And all because he has doubts in his soul that they haven't seen each other for so many years. And both have changed a lot since then. It's worth getting to know each other better before that. It's very good that our hero managed to calm her down. The girl stopped crying and only smiled, agreeing with his words. But before his departure, there was very little time left. and since Xiaohua would be staying here alone, she should buy some clothes. As a caring friend, he of course paid for her and allowed her to go to the most expensive boutique, choose what she wanted, and the first thing she noticed was a very beautiful skirt. The girl came out of the fitting room, and our hero's face even had a slight blush from such beauty. His girlfriend noticed this and only laughed quietly when suddenly the smile disappeared from her face. She looked at the tag and saw the price. This beautiful thing was quite expensive, and therefore she refused to take it. But Yuan had a completely different opinion. He took her hand and approached the seller, saying that they were now buying everything she was wearing. In total, it came to about 4,000, and the woman, smiling, asked about the payment method. The brunette took out a card, and his girlfriend is still standing in shock and doesn't understand where he got so much money from. To which our hero laughed. Now it would be best to keep the secret of his golden finger. When they left the clothing store, Yuan offered to buy her something else. But Xiaohua refused such an offer, as it would be unwise to waste the family's money. And besides, the boy also has his own things to do. He has to go to the airport for an important Jianbao meeting. The boys went together to the plane, which had just arrived, and set off together to their destination. They were met by a long-haired girl, and Uncle Gun should have been with her, but for some reason he was nowhere to be seen. As it turned out, he had already left, and now she would have to accompany the boy to the hotel. Xiaohua turned to our hero and asked who she was, which made the boy confused and say that she was just his friend. But she really helps him in difficult times. The girl looked after her and said directly that she thought she liked him. Yuan jumped up to her and covered her mouth with his hand, asking her not to say anything unnecessary, since she was the daughter of very influential parents. The friend calmly removed his hand and said directly that she really thought so, because her intuition had never let her down. The redhead soon took the boy to his room, and now she had to take his friend to hers, to which she cried out in displeasure and said directly that she wanted to live with Yuan, and pressed herself against him, causing him to blush. Madame looked at her from the corner of her eye. Now it would be best to be more restrained because people who are not married cannot live in the same room? The girl looked at her displeasedly and screamed that she couldn't sleep without him and insisted that she be allowed to live with him. The women stood for a couple of seconds and stared into each other's eyes. No one understood why she was clinging to our hero, and he himself began to feel very awkward watching all this, and so he decided to leave the girls alone. It was time for him to unwind a little. When he went out into the corridor, it became much freer and even calmer. It was time to look around this luxurious hotel. Suddenly, he is stopped by someone's voice. Very familiar? These are the two guys with whom he fought last time. The bespectacled man looked at him with an evil smile and ordered his subordinate to deal with him as quickly as possible, because he would have to pay him for everything that happened. The bald man ran up to him and swung his leg, intending to hit him in the face. Last time he used the exact same tactic, and so he couldn't repeat the same trick a second time. Yuan hit him hard in response. The martial arts champion is also not going to stand still and will do the same. He adopted the tactic of moving quickly and delivered a couple more blows to our hero's stomach. Unfortunately, he was unable to repel this attack. It seems that his golden finger is still developing and cannot withstand such men. The boss came up to him and started laughing, pulling his hair. He needed this battle to continue. Unexpectedly for him, Yuan suddenly jumped up from his feet and punched him in the face, hard enough to make his nose bleed. The bully stepped back and covered himself with his hand, ordering his subordinate to quickly deal with him. In just a couple of seconds, the bald man was right next to him, and this time he wouldn't hold back. It was a good thing that Uncle Gun was there and was able to stop him with one hand, right in front of our hero's face. The bespectacled man began to make fun of him, twisting his palm. The way he fights, it's just kindergarten. He just needs to learn all the martial arts. The boss stood up for his subordinate and began to threaten the old man that he would attack him too if he thought he didn't have enough courage. The old man smiled and advised the heir of Gao to stop this whole circus because the meeting was opening soon. And did they really want to lose by starting arguments? The bespectacled man looked menacingly into his eyes and thought, it seems that Jojo definitely sent him, and decides to retreat in order to see his defeat with his own eyes. He sighed dissatisfiedly, took his comrade and went to the door. Now their next meeting will be at a meeting. Our hero was already standing to the side and stretching his arms, quietly approaching his grandfather, who thanked him for everything he had done, as this was not the first time he had helped him out of trouble. The old man smiled back at him and asked me to negotiate with him, since for him such things were trifles. Joe was already standing nearby and saw everything. Uncle was one of the 5 elders in the Taizi sect, even though it was a long time ago. But Gong continues to be modest. As it turns out, all this time our hero thought that Kung Fu was just a legend, but he just saw the exact opposite of his thoughts. He would like to gain experience and fight like that someday. And now, it was time to patch up the wounds. His girlfriend ran up to him and began to nervously wipe the abrasions, scolding him for getting into a fight again. But she should have gotten used to the fact that people sometimes lose control of themselves. That's nothing. But tomorrow the boy is in for a really tough battle. Before the Yi boys could blink, the next day had already arrived and the Jianbao meeting was about to begin. People began to gather, security was also in place, and had already made a remark to the victorious four that, According to the rules, only 2 people could represent Seng. The brunette looked at Uncle Gun and Jojo, wondering who would go with him now. Just at that moment, he hears footsteps behind him. It's that bully who imagines himself to be Seng's husband. The man is standing behind him or smiling. He looked at him and asked what he would advise now. But obviously, from a person like him, one can only expect ridicule. His people have already conducted reconnaissance and know that he is an orphan. He laughed and teased him about how none of his loved ones would come to console him after he lost, and that at such an event one couldn't let go of one's hands. Suddenly, the focus shifted sharply to another person, who was almost unknown to anyone here. A bearded man walked through the door and smiled slightly. The only ones who recognized him were Joe and Uncle Gong, who couldn't believe that he was invited after all. The man looks at him from under his glasses with a piercing gaze, and our hero stands there, perplexed, not understanding who he is and why he should be so worried. It turns out that this man is a famous appraiser throughout the country. His name is unknown, but he has a nickname, Vizgliad. Xiaohua began to laugh loudly. She was amused by that strange nickname. It made her stomach hurt. But it's best not to relax now, because this person only needs one look to leave the merchant penniless, and the people who were deceived are also looking for him to take a look at their goods. Yuan turned back, and the man was also looking at him and just smiling. Now it becomes clear that the main opponent in this round for the boy is he, and no one else. Everyone else can only try to catch up with him. And even in spite of all this, the brunette is confident in his victory, and is confident that everything will be fine. The guy is too hopeful that his golden finger will help him out. And now this time, Mrs. Jojo will go with our hero. And all because she is worried that her fate lies only in his hands, and she will not be able to remain calm until the end. Yuan's friend didn't like this at all and demanded that she let go of her hand and not touch her future husband. Longhair told him along the way that all the exhibits here were only from collectors from these 2 markets. But he didn't understand why they wanted to display their antiques here. As it turns out, this is all because if an exhibit wins, or rather becomes one of the most valuable, its price will increase significantly. No one wants to miss out on such an opportunity, and it's not even clear which item is fake or original. The point is that not all goods here represent any value. The boy's guess turned out to be true, and now it's time to begin the most interesting part. The host of their meeting gave an introductory speech, after which it was time to move on to the rules. The boy looked at her with slight misunderstanding. Is it really true that even at such an event there are rules? As the woman explained, participants can only select 3 exhibits and no more. They are not allowed to touch them, and all hope lies in an expert opinion. Moreover, time is limited. After this speech, the boy even became serious. Very bad news for his golden finger. His girlfriend noticed that something was wrong with him, and he decided to tell her that something was wrong. Those 2 opponents stood higher and continued to mock our hero. They can't wait to see him screw up. Yuan Hong took his ally by the hand and asked her to step aside with her. It was not worth lowering herself to their level, especially now. The Chinese man turned to his friend, whom he had come to help, and warned him that even though our hero was here on behalf of the Seng family, he still needed to be quite careful. But he himself behaves rather frivolously and does not worry about the situation because there are many more of them here. And besides, if you use the secret rule, victory is guaranteed. Our hero took his partner to a quiet place where no one would see or hear them. She looked at him with slight confusion because she didn't understand why he brought her here. We're going to talk about rules that aren't very advantageous. There are 2 of them, which means they can only choose 6 items, and that's the whole point. But to be much more specific, there are only 24 participants at the meeting. And if they unite and collect all the most valuable things, then the chances will be much higher than theirs. But it seems that this is not all. The brunette sighed heavily and lowered his eyes to the floor. According to him, all the participants are far from ordinary individuals, and therefore, they really need to seize the initiative. The blonde decides to get to the heart of the matter and asks what their plan will be now. Looking nervously into his eyes, the brown-eyed man asked her to give him 3 attempts to touch the exhibit, of course, if she trusts him. It still sounds rather illogical to her, since she also has at least some experience working with antiques, and she is interested to know what this is all about. His little secret must still remain a secret, and so Yuan asks only to trust him. The first thing that caught my eye was a tripod. Quite a few of these have been excavated from the Warring States period, and one can assume that this item is quite valuable. There is no time to think, and therefore, our hero decides to touch it first. Suddenly, one of their enemy's men approaches them and is going to take it for himself. Yuan turns around and sees their boss, who is standing and just smirking. It becomes clear that he is only acting on a tip, but there is no need to be upset. You need to go to another valuable product and choose it. This time again, their attempt was unsuccessful. Again, they were overtaken and the goods were carried off right before their eyes. This happened more than once. After this whole circus, Jojo could no longer stand it and approached Gao himself with complaints about what he was doing here. He looked at her from above and directly stated that he was acting in accordance with the rules. It is obvious that he is cheating, using dirty tricks to achieve what he wants. But even if so, what will be his next steps? Our hero looked him straight in the eyes and asked, What if he was deliberately leading him to the junk? It was obvious that he was watching what his gaze fell on. The man gritted his teeth and swung at him, intending to hit him. And he doesn't like being scared like that. But it's very good that his friend was nearby and stopped him. Our hero is smart. And since these two have spoken, then they need to part on this note and continue to compete in their abilities. Madame Jojo approached our hero and asked if all this was true, or if he really wanted to confuse them. But he can't even tell her the truth now, because this is a psychological war and not a game of selection of things. Soon the presenter announced the end of the challenge. The participants' time was up. Now the moment of truth had arrived. It was time to move on to the next stage. The two biggest rivals have stepped forward, each confident. The woman looked at them, and with a smile, invited them to come to the table where their chosen exhibits were displayed. Mr. Gao admitted that this time he hired the most insightful person, and it cost a lot of money. And no matter what happens, the boy will still lose, according to him. The brunette grinned and asked him not to be so confident, because who knows what will happen next? Maybe someone else will shed tears and not him. The green-haired man laughed loudly and tore the cloth off the table. In front of the boys, there was a whole row of objects covered with small sheets. Everyone was looking at them carefully. The presenter came closer and said that these people turned out to be the best, and each showed their talents in evaluating things. Now we need to look at how they coped with this test. Uncle Gun and our hero's friend are standing on the balcony and looking with excitement at everything that is happening. They are interested in what goods the guys have chosen. The green-haired man came closer and decided to see what was presented here, under the very last towel. Our hero looked him straight in the eyes and agreed that he would open it quickly. A very suspicious reaction, as it seemed to Gao, and he was already getting angry. But his hired friend asked him to wait and see what he would do. The brunette looked them straight in the eye and said that they were going to play their games, and therefore he was going to look at all the exhibits at once. The people who came as spectators watched everyone carefully. They liked this guy, but they still think that Mr. Gao will win. The man smiled and agreed to let him do just that. The guys began to open the items one by one, and all the guests froze and watched calmly. But the audience's attention focused on something completely different. A porcelain horse from a famous dynasty. Some of the guys also recognized the ancient painted tripod of the Yuan dynasty. Its price is quite high, and their total is even more so. Our hero has already opened all his items and looks at the audience with cold blood. The crowd began to ridicule him, since almost all the valuable exhibits had been selected by Mr. Gao, in the opinion of other experts. His opponent looked him straight in the eyes and asked him if he wanted to say anything now, with a slight smirk on his face. Our hero smiled and said that there was one more exhibit, and perhaps it was one of the rarest artifacts in the world, who knows? But whether there were fakes among the enemy's selected items was already questionable. And after these words, the whole hall fell silent. Everyone remembered the existence of one more thing, and this guy's words now made sense, which means the heir can lose. Gao heard their conversations and shouted at the crowd not to mumble under his hand. His dearest guest approached him and calmed down, asking the heir to be patient and not to worry ahead of time, because they too had not yet revealed their last item. And even despite this, the man still continues to worry, because now everything may go completely differently than they planned. The bearded man is sure that this newcomer cannot be better than him. And besides, his father chose him last, and he will definitely cover the entire amount. The brunette smiled back at him, and indeed, now he could rest easy. His dad wouldn't be able to allow him to lose. Meanwhile, our hero's girlfriend and Uncle Gun are watching from above. It seems that they are not saying anything good there. The long-haired woman is already starting to worry. She thought about the fact that all the organizations of this meeting are run by them, and it is possible that they deliberately put out their most expensive jewelry. Of course, Yuan's victory is now in great doubt. Even the old man couldn't have guessed that such a multi-move game could have happened. Now she had a hunch that the old man had put his things there too. She looked straight into his eyes. As it turned out, the girl was right. And besides, he put out the family talisman of the Cheng family, and now they can hope that the young people have found it. The rivals exchanged glances and had already decided to open their last treasures, which they had found here. Gao took his first step, and the hall froze because in front of them was the Qinglong Jade regalia. It was truly an incredible antique. No one expected to see such a thing. It really is very expensive. Now it's our hero's turn, and he has a huge shiny blade here. The spectators stopped and began to examine it carefully. It seemed that no one knew about this thing. The man began to laugh loudly. He had really been afraid from the very beginning that he had dared to hide something valuable. But now it was obvious that victory was his, and Mrs. Zhou would be his only beneficiary. Even the bearded man confirmed that they had won. The bronze weapon was a good antique, but only Gujian's sword was valuable. This young man really had a lot to learn. But then his girlfriend came up to him and asked all the spectators to be quiet and take their time. It was time to show all the cards. The guy looked at everyone in turn, who looked at him and confidently said that this blade belonged to Qin Shi Huang. But no one expected this. They now have a national treasure in front of them. And Uncle Gun rubs his mustache and just smiles. It's very good that they were able to find what they left behind. As it turns out, the ancestors of the Cheng family had already discovered his tomb and entered it, and now all questions are closed. As the girl could guess, their family was in the tomb before the state, and now everything proves why this blade is so valuable. Their opponents were speechless, and Gao himself wanted to find out who had exhibited this thing. But then his beloved came up and asked who had shown the Jade King long regalia. The bearded man approached the heir and said directly that this guy chose this thing only on the advice of the Cheng family. Someone was able to guess about their plans earlier. Now the brunette got angry and forced all his subordinates to be checked to find out who the traitor was. Well, the presenter won't let him do that. She asked all the experts to conduct an examination of all the selected exhibits. And here is the expert of the Mogao and Southern Jade Market. The guys shook hands, looked at each other, and are getting ready to get to work. Now the trial will be fair, and Mrs. Zhou herself approached Yuan and said with a smile that if he liked this antique, then she really wanted him to take it. He was satisfied with the initial conditions, but as it turned out, he was not ready for such a step. The girl looked at him frightened and asked what exactly he meant. The brunette smiled and told her directly that her family really had a great ability, and this sword was quite likely to be genuine. The blonde was even confused. She was seeing him for the first time. Before, her grandfather had only told her about him, and she didn't know anything else. And yet, our hero stands his ground. He is sure that this is the original. And all because he touched him. He is imperial, and also with a divine spirit. It emits a fairly powerful energy. It is worthy of the level of an emperor. And after touching it, his ring finger noticeably changed. He stared at him for a couple of minutes. Yuan doesn't understand what's going on here, but his friend wants to know more about why he was staring at him like that. Whether he was really scared, and whether he was able to understand that he was really real. A lot of questions arose in her head. The boy heard her say something and asked what had happened. But she shuddered and said that she had indeed been silent just now and had not said a word. Now everything became clear. His finger now allows him to read the thoughts of other people. The boy hears a quiet whisper, but everyone around him is silent. It turns out that a new ability has been revealed to him. He only needs to focus his attention on his finger, and he will be able to hear what those around him are thinking. But at what distance this works, it remains to be seen. There is no point in wasting time, and the brunette decides right now to find out how far he can use his ability. In these literally couple of seconds, he heard quite a lot of thoughts, and one right now seems to help him learn something else about his opponent. He was able to read the thoughts of the expert who was checking the artifacts of the Gao family. It seems that he is about to lie right now and say that this sword is an ordinary fake. This family really does have quite a few trump cards in store that are difficult to detect. It was at this moment that the bearded man spoke to his friend and reminded him that they still had a backup plan. As it turned out, the Gao family expert could influence Mo and make the two of them say that the sword was a fake. A slight grin appeared on the green-haired man's face. Now he was confident that victory was his, but our hero is very worried about this. He needs to come up with some kind of plan of action very quickly so that these crooks don't win. His friend Jojo noticed how he was standing there, sweaty and nervous, and she worriedly asked what was wrong with him. The brown-eyed man whispered and asked what would happen if one of these people said that the sword was real and the other was a fake. And if this happens, then 10 experts will be invited from both sides who will review the result, and if their opinions coincide, then there will be no verification. And only now did the girl realize that it was possible that Gao would bribe their expert. Of course, these are just her guesses, but they turned out to be true. And now it is very important not to fuss and get yourself together. The blonde began to nervously tug at his shirt and asked if he had at least some kind of plan. The brunette wiped the sweat from his face and said that he needed time to think everything over carefully. To help him think better, Yuan closed his eyes and began to think about all their possible weak points, as well as eavesdrop on their thoughts. And after a couple of seconds when they had already finished checking, an idea came to him that could work. Meanwhile, the presenter had already announced that the meeting was coming to an end, and it was time to sum up. The experts have stepped forward and now they have the floor. Yuan approached one of them and asked what was more important, the life of his son or the life of his entire family. The bald man became wary and asked what he was talking about. Our hero has nothing against him, but he is sure that he knows the Cheng family better than him. The man was a little confused because he couldn't know about his son, and he was even threatening him. But now does he really want to betray the people who treat him so well? The fat man frowned and even became nervous. But just as he wanted to say something, he was interrupted. Mr. Gao shouted at the two of them and demanded that they stop whispering when it was time to show their cards. He turned to the expert standing next to him and demanded that he announce the result right then and there. The blonde stepped forward and declared that all the exhibits presented here, with the exception of the Emperor's Ball, were genuine. The hall erupted into chaos, with other guys getting very worried about whether the sword was a fake. But some asked me to start the fuss and let the second expert speak. The presenter turned to family expert Cheng Yi and asked him to express his opinion on this matter. The bald man thought for a second about this guy's words. The life of his entire family depends on the Cheng family, and betraying them will have consequences. Our hero continued to put pressure on him. Even if he accepted a bribe from Gao, and his son returned home from the hospital, it would be simply impossible to continue living like this. And finally, the expert realized what choice he now had to make. The fat man raised his hand and confidently declared that the sword was genuine, and that he agreed with the first expert regarding the other exhibits. Gao gritted his teeth and shouted at him to reconsider his decision. He should have thought better before saying such things. Now, the second time, the man stands much more confidently and declares that the blade is genuine. The audience started whispering again. For the first time in a long time, it happened that the experts' opinions diverged, and it was now unclear who was right. And in that case, the presenter announced that it was now time to call in a group of experts to check the results again. Men in black suits and dark glasses entered the hall, and the crowd began to part to the side to let them pass. One of them carefully took the blade and placed it on the table, carefully examining it. The boy turned to his girlfriend and smiled and said that now everything should be fine for them. Their plan had gone as planned. There are still quite a lot of questions in the girl's head, but it's too early to reveal the cards, and he promises to tell only if they win. The blonde is slightly unhappy that he is keeping the intrigue and not saying anything. But now the most important thing is that they were able to avoid losing. Madame still doesn't understand what's going on here and wants to know what he means. At that moment, Yuan turned to his expert and asked what his son's name was. The bald man became slightly wary, but nevertheless decided to clarify the reason for such questions. The brunette said directly that he helped him, and he cannot stay in the Ark and will help save his son. Meanwhile, the re-examination had already been completed. The men were ready to announce the results and described that all the characteristics corresponded to what they should be. Ultimately, since it matches the supposed age, appearance, and other criteria, it is confirmed that the Emperor's sword is genuine. The other spectators couldn't believe it, especially those against the Cheng family, that they lost. One of the experts was deceiving everyone. Gao himself was fed up with all this noise, and he shouted at everyone present to keep quiet in this situation. But his hired friend tried to calm him down. And it was a shame, because he received a good kick in the stomach and fell to the floor. The green-haired man shouted at Yuan. But now it's all pointless, because it's already known who won and who lost. Finally, the host announced the results of the meeting. Zhou and Yuan Hong won. Uncle Gong watches everything from the side and only smiles, along with his girlfriend. And the old man would really like this guy to become Seng's bride. His opponent still can't believe he just lost and promises that he will pay for everything he did. The brunette just chuckled and said that he would look forward to their next encounter. As for the traitor who betrayed the Gao family, he was threatened that his son would no longer be able to be by his side. Just the thought of it sent shivers down his spine and tears started flowing. The man loved him to bits and wanted everything to be okay. Their conversation was interrupted by Yuan, who offered a rematch. To give him a chance to win, the man was aggressively inclined but still did not refuse. This time they now have a bet for life, which he himself came up with. The brunette laughed loudly throughout the room and, without thinking twice, agreed. In that case, if he wins, he will control our hero's life and vice versa. The brown-eyed man interrupted him and refused such an offer. He had a completely different option, namely, to take not his life, but the life of the son of that fat man who helped him. But if he loses, then his life will be in the hands of Gao. A slight smile appeared on the opponent's face, but he still agreed to these conditions. Right now, only justice was important, and so the boy even agreed that Gao would decide how to resolve their dispute. Madame Jojo approached our hero and asked why he was doing this for the sake of some person to whom he had no connection. But he certainly has a reason for this. If it weren't for him, they would have quickly lost. And therefore, in any case, they should be grateful to him. After these words, the girl turned away and blushed slightly. The three of them gathered together and started planning something. Yuan watched them closely. No matter what they were planning, he was ready to strike blow for blow. And after a couple of minutes, the man seemed to have already come up with a type of competition. Everything, according to him, would be simple and courageous. A slight smile appeared on the boy's face, and he agreed to listen to his conditions right then and there. Specifically, there will be a no-holds-barred fight now, in which our hero will participate together with that bald martial arts champion. This solution to the problem only made him laugh. There was not a drop of courage here. No, since he was hiding behind the back of his bodyguard. But since it comes down to it, Yuan still accepts his challenge. The guys went in a whole crowd to a separate room to hold this duel. It was only halfway through that our hero noticed that Xiao was nearby, along with Zhou. It turned out that Uncle Gong wanted to take full responsibility, and only Qing herself would watch the fight. His opponent heard their conversation and said directly that they would not interfere with them. Soon they arrived at the place. Nearby there is a mirror wall where everything will take place. According to Gao, the glass on the ring side is mirrored, but from the outside you can see everything that happens during the fight. And besides, it's worth saying right now that his father and Mr. Cheng are discussing business with an influential person. This made Zhou wary, as did Yuan, and they simply glanced at each other. The experienced fighter jumped onto the battlefield and tore off his shirt. Now it was our hero's turn, and he showed him that he should quickly climb up to him. But before everything starts, Yuan wants to repeat all the rules regarding betting. Mr. Gao just laughed and said that since he wasn't ready yet, he might as well give up and run away while there was still time. But our hero is not a coward and is going to accept this challenge. His girlfriend is standing next to him and supporting him. Jojo also wished him good luck and stepped aside. Yuan jumped up to his opponent and gestured for him to come closer to him. Meanwhile, other more influential persons were sitting in a separate room and discussing something. One gentleman proudly said that in front of them was the training hall of his son, who was well versed in hand-to-hand combat. Now he wonders what Zhou'er is doing here, since he should be at the Jianbao meeting. One of the guests expressed his desire to go there personally and see how everything was arranged there, and the fighter's father agreed. Just before the start, the men came in and began to look around. Yuan didn't expect that there would be so many people who wanted to watch their fight. The old man began to look at him carefully and saw in him his master in his youth. But our hero was confused and saw in him the man who helped Du Yuan at the meeting. For looking around, Yuan received a good punch in the face from his opponent, who was already tired of waiting. The brunette jumped to the side, and for such a sudden attack, he was going to respond in kind. At that very second, the bald man headed straight towards him and swung his leg, intending to hit him very hard. The boy watches his movements closely, and it seems that he is much slower than him. It becomes clear who has a better chance of winning now. Yuan got into a fighting stance and swung. Before he could even blink, the finger awakened his abilities and his strength grew. Now our hero has the opportunity to swell. He hits him very hard in the stomach. The enemy falls to the ground and starts coughing violently, and the girls watch the two of them from the side with delight. Xiaohua is also watching closely from the side. She can't believe that Yuan has such enormous strength. Although he seemed weaker before, his boss Gao stands to the side and demands that the fighter get up and show his championship skills in hand-to-hand combat and not lie on the ground. But it is worth noting that his opponent has changed very much. It seems that our hero himself cannot believe that he has such power. Some ordinary finger is capable of such a thing. And now, an interest awakened in him to try his full strength. And in the end, the bald man was able to rise to his feet and get into a fighting stance, promising himself that he would not lose. But again, these guys are playing unfairly, using iron knuckles. And now you have to be much more careful. Baldy rushed straight at our hero, and he doesn't care that they have already broken every possible rule. The most important thing is victory. The girls jumped back and asked the boy to be much more careful, since he had a cold weapon. The uninvited guests also stood nearby and watched the fight closely. Everyone wanted Du Yuan to win. Only that gray-haired man looked at our hero and simply remained silent. And since the rules themselves have already begun to be broken, then why shouldn't Yuan break them too? Now he will play at full strength. The boys hit each other at the same time, and it seemed that only one of them was hurt enough. The bald man flew to the other end of the arena and simply fell. He flew out of the ring's boundaries and landed on his stomach. It looks like he got hit pretty well. Gao, Xiaohua, and Ruozhou stand nearby, unable to take their eyes off the boy, as if they were speechless. And the other older guests began to get nervous and did not understand where Du Yuan was getting so much aggression from. And besides, these techniques are not at all like the techniques of the Yuan family. As the old man noted, the blow was quite strong. And in the end, the girls praised our hero for being able to finish him off so well. Even though his shirt is scratched and his body is scratched too, the boy stands there with a smile on his face and is not going to back down. Now is the time to hear the answer from the heir of Gao. Whether he will let him go? He stood and trembled. It seemed that the answer was obvious. He had already accepted defeat for the second time. The fight should have already ended, when suddenly the gray-haired man who had been looking at the boy from the very beginning asked what his name was. Yuan gave his name and also decided to ask why such questions were being asked. The bearded man was very surprised. His uncle said that he once lost contact with his son, and that guy had the same name as me. Maybe it's a coincidence, maybe not. Our hero stared at him intently, wondering why he was behaving so strangely, and standing there with a strange expression on his face. But after a couple of seconds, he let go. The old man smiled at him and asked him to forget about it. Adjusting his jacket, he said that he sincerely wanted to try a couple of moves in the ring with him right now. The boy came closer to him and, sighing heavily, said that there was no need for this, and now he began to suspect that he was also groveling before Gao. The old man looked at him emotionlessly and asked him not to talk nonsense, since his goal now was simply to test his skills. In that case, the boy agreed, but only on the condition that this scoundrel would release the child from the hostage. There is a little boy standing nearby and he is really crying. Watching all this, the old man glanced at him sideways. Others also started to attack him, trying to get him to let the baby go. The scoundrel ran up to the child and began to untie his hands while he stood there crying. And before he released him, Yuan warned that if even the slightest scratch remained on him, the same thing would happen to him as Liu. They sorted this out. And finally, the old man told him that he could easily turn to him if he ever needed his help. He would always help and be there. The boy smiled back at him, but still didn't trust him. And since he didn't work for Gao, he certainly didn't want to touch him. Grandpa came closer and asked him not to worry, and allowed him to hit with full force after all. Someone was practicing martial arts on his own. The old man got into a fighting stance and with a smile asked him to attack him. Uncle Gong also observes all this and is familiar with this technique of Beijing Yuanxi. As soon as everything worked out for him there, Tot immediately came here, and his teacher for many years was the best in the world. But he was unable to repel this very blow that they are now going to use on our hero. After hearing these words, Joe looked at Yuan with excitement and became even more worried. In his thoughts, together with his girlfriend, they stood next to him and supported him, so that he would not get hurt. The brunette rushed straight towards his opponent, wasting no time to show what he was capable of. He wanted to start with something simple and hit him with his fist. But despite his age, the man was able to dodge. His speed is incredibly high, and he even managed to swing his hand at him. At that moment, the boy froze, and in that moment the thought flashed through his mind that he didn't need to move, otherwise his life would end. After a couple of seconds, the grandfather stepped back and said with a smile that he had won. But Yuan had been defeated. Brown-Eyed looked at him and with a smile thanked him for saving his life. He didn't need him anymore now. Grandpa smiled back at him and said that such honorable thanks were not worth expressing now. And since that's all, Brunei wants to leave this ring as soon as possible and is getting ready to leave. But the old man is not going to back down. It seems to him that he has already managed to hold a couple of trump cards. But if they had fought to the death, he would have won anyway. The grandfather was sure of it. Yuan nodded his head and said directly that as long as no one bothered him, he would not bother anyone and take such steps. This young man actually managed to interest the old martial arts master, and he asked him what his plans were for the future. According to the young man, he doesn't have any special aspirations. To begin with, he would just like to start his own business. He hasn't even thought about anything else yet. And thanks to his golden finger, he has a couple of million now. He had plans to open his own antique shop, but his grandfather seemed to read his mind and even agreed to work with him, promising to give him business in 2 cities. His other guys began to dissuade Mr. Yuan from doing this because it was too risky. But he interrupted them and even shouted, because it was not their turn to speak yet, and they were already chatting and chatting. The men gritted their teeth and simply listened to their conversation in silence, with dissatisfied expressions on their faces. Mrs. Zhou can't figure out what kind of person this is, because it seems that even his father is scared to death of him. Meanwhile, the boy thanked his new acquaintance for the offer. However, he believes that he still doesn't deserve it and therefore won't be able to accept it, at least for now. And that is why the young man comes down from the battlefield to the girls and leaves waving goodbye. The old gentleman began to compare him with his acquaintance, who clearly interested him greatly, and therefore he was going to hire people to look after him. And once all the events were published in the news, it was worth engaging him in dialogue again. Zhu approached Yuan and asked him directly why he had refused, since he would now have to worry about little things for many years. But trusting a stranger like him was quite risky, because he doesn't even understand where he came from. And it's like committing suicide. He'll probably stab you in the back at the first opportunity. As for the store, it was just a joke, because now he has other plans. As it turns out, Yuan is still a student. The guy is graduating this year, but he still hasn't written his thesis. It's time for him to get his head together and go back to school. But when he came to university, his professor had already checked some of the work and asked other students to try harder to complete their thesis well. At this moment, our hero walks through the door, very sleepy and exhausted. It's clear that he definitely hasn't slept for a couple of nights. Madame looked at him in confusion and invited him into the office. As it turned out, he hadn't attended consultations and classes for quite a long time, and now there are quite a lot of questions for him. The brunette smiled at her and asked if she would believe him if he told her now that he was going to an internship, but in fact the truth was different. And even despite his justification, the teacher continued to be angry, because even in this situation, you can't skip all the classes, because the career guidance teacher says that he has already failed her subject several times. Our hero looked at her from under his forehead and said bluntly that he had already chosen a suitable profession, and it turns out that he didn't really need to go to lessons. The girl sighed heavily and rolled her eyes without saying anything. It was time to get down to business, and she asked him to show her his diploma. It was very surprising for her, but it was a fact that, although he had missed a lot of classes, he had written his thesis very well, and of course the golden finger is to blame for everything. Thanks to his second ability, he became smarter and now understands books that he didn't understand before, and it's now obvious why his academic performance has improved. His classmate came up just in time and with mockery, he can't believe that he had enough money to order a diploma. Madame reprimanded Jan Chu. He shouldn't be so rude to other students. But the red-haired man is outraged that she made him rewrite his work more than 10 times. What kind of respect can we talk about here? The boy has known Yanli for quite a long time. She always asks sternly how the teachers used to be in the old days, and the others turn a blind eye to everything. And she, in turn, reminded him that this student simply went and copied the work. And since she is his academic supervisor, she has the right to force him to redo everything. And more than once, the redhead had already admitted that he had personally paid the man for the diploma. And he was determined to do something if she forced him to redo it again. The lady crossed her arms over her chest and said outright that she would not even open it and would only accept handmade work. But this time, the boy went too far and began to wave his hand at her so that she would accept the work. Yuan stood up for her and reminded her that she was still his teacher, And it wouldn't take long to go and rewrite the paper. Red continued to rage in the office, and his anger had already transferred to our hero, who began to threaten that he would immediately take and knock him out with one blow. The boy looked at him with a smile and said directly that Professor Yang was very responsible and conscientious. The best thing he could do in this situation was to calm down. The girl looked at him and she felt truly pleased. Only he understands her, but this student has a completely different opinion of her. He wants her to accept her thesis as soon as possible and is even willing to pay. In addition, before this, the rude man spoke badly about the person closest to him, his mother, and was not afraid to say it to his face. It's a pity that he doesn't watch his words, for this Yuan has every right to hit him. The guy flew into the door of the next room, and the teacher looked on from the sidelines and decided not to get involved in their male squabble. The redhead started coughing and threatened to call his men to deal with him. But Yuan wasn't going to play games with them, so he simply demanded that he get the hell out of there. The redhead was truly scared and promised that they would cross paths again. The woman came closer to our hero and gently touched him on the shoulder, asking him not to stoop to such a level. No matter what else he said, they had to report it to the dean's office. They could no longer deal with such people. The student truly felt very sorry for the way he had behaved, but he was forced to do so by what he had said about his mother, who had died quite recently. Madame was very confused and she felt sincerely sorry for her student. For a second, she was confused and froze in place. The girl had heard that hugs were the best way to ease suffering, so she walked up to him and hugged him, expressing her support. Our hero reciprocated her feelings and hugged her back, thanking the professor for his help and support. And just at that moment, this cocky student comes in, along with his friends, pointing a finger at the one who dared to hit him. A gang of several guys came to their office. Some of them were even armed. A rather tall and muscular guy approached Yuan and decided to clarify whether he dared to raise his hand against his younger brother. No one reacted to the teacher's words anymore, and the boy simply sincerely said that it was his doing. But what surprised the bald man even more was that he stood there and didn't even blush. He wasn't ashamed of his actions. The boy silently hit him in the face so as not to listen to his useless chatter. His other guys stand in horror and can't decide who to send to help his brother. Yuan himself grabbed him by the throat and lifted him up, lifting him off the ground, looking intently into his eyes. The bald man began to smile and ask him to let him go so they could talk calmly. Our hero simply threw him to the ground. He can just take their lives at any moment if he wants to. And finally, he was able to get to his feet and headed towards the door. And when he saw Yuan's gaze on himself, he decided to run away as quickly as possible, and he would deal with the teacher a little later. Our hero looked at the girl and saw how she stood there and didn't know what to do. The boy grabbed the bald man by the shirt and pulled him towards himself before he could leave, because he had already managed to read his thoughts and knew what his plans were. Yuan threw him to the ground and crushed him with his foot, directly saying that he knew about his intentions to settle scores with the professor. Of course, he began to nervously deny his own words, trying to smile quite calmly. But he couldn't stay calm. Yuan swung his fist and hit him literally a couple of centimeters from his face. And finally, our hero warned him that if even one hair fell from Professor Yan, he didn't know what he could do with it. The man laughed nervously and promised that he would never be bullied again. The rest of his gang stood to the side and watched everything that was happening. Meanwhile, our hero had an idea. He paid them a fairly large sum, but only so that they would do something for him. He pointed his finger at Zhangju and asked him to teach him a lesson for everything he had done. Red got scared and asked them to stop and think before doing this, because they were all his brothers after all. Meanwhile, that bald guy lies and watches everything that is happening. He sees how incredibly strong our hero is. Inhuman strength flows through his veins, and even if he grabs his leg, it is unlikely that anything will change. And he decided to kneel before him and asked him to state his name, that now he was his debtor. Our hero glanced at him sideways and finally decided to let him go, because he might still be useful to him. Yuan accepted his service, but also asked him to keep in mind that he did not want to deal with their criminal underworld. During the conversation, it became known that their gang is called the Gang of Tattooed People. Although it sounds a little boring, it suits them. Our hero laughed and suggested that they change the name to an association of bald people, because that way they could do good deeds or, even better, find a decent job somewhere. He stopped for a couple of seconds and thought, and indeed, this option suited him much more than the previous one. Since this man is responsible for his brother, Yuan decides to give him a piece of the precious stone and finally tells him his name. The victim accepted his gift and simply watched as he entered the office. Of course, our hero went straight to the professor, who was horrified by what was happening. The student is sincerely worried about her. The situation is truly terrible, and it's very good that Yan doesn't know all the details. Most likely, the woman heard all these sounds and perhaps thinks that he killed someone. But our hero himself said that nothing criminal happened, and they supposedly just had a preventive conversation. It's surprising that the teacher took it all so calmly and decided to get straight to the point and make some edits to his thesis. And finally, after he talked to her, he was going to go on with his other business. He had someone he needed to visit. The brunette approached the right door and knocked to be opened, introducing himself as Yuan Hong. Hearing this name, a bespectacled man opened the door for him. It seemed to be an acquaintance of his. He recognized him immediately. His goal today is to visit his old friends, whom he never forgets. To be more specific, our hero needs help in starting his own company, and he knows perfectly well that he has come to the right place. In addition, he plans to speak to investors and will be in charge of all company development and finances. The man adjusted his glasses and asked what exactly he meant. As it turns out, it is this guy who wants to appoint him as chief executive officer. The offer is quite good, but he can't just take on a bunch of responsibilities and takes a step back. It's obvious that the problem is not that the guy is against it, but that he is too worried about another girl, although it's time to move on. The bespectacled man sat down in his place and said directly that she left him because of money, and therefore everything that concerns finances hurts him. The boy was tired of hearing this sniveling and whining, so he gave him a good slap in the face. The man was confused and began to rub his cheek, but he definitely wouldn't be able to sit in one place for long when his friend was nearby. Yuan grabs his hand tightly and leads him somewhere without saying anything. The only thing that is clear from his words is that he is going to return his dignity, and he is silent about what will happen next. Although he struggled, but he certainly couldn't escape anywhere. The brunette took him out into the street. There is already some kind of car parked near the building, and it looks like their friend is waiting for them. He grinned and spoke to our coward, and reminded him of the situation where a girl beat him up and he couldn't even respond in any way. The bespectacled man broke free from our hero's hands and was about to leave, as he didn't want to deal with this man. But Yuan himself stopped him, because the most interesting part had not yet begun. He called the boy's car ordinary and mediocre, looking him straight in the eyes. The man gritted his teeth and said that he had paid almost $500,000 for it, and that even if they had sold all their property, they would not have been able to afford it. The brunette just grinned and walked up to her, lightly stroking the hood. The owner of the car didn't like this, and he continued to be rude to him, demanding that he finally leave here, since he already knew what he wanted. Well, what's surprising is that if you just lightly touch it, a dent the size of a fist appears on it. His friend saw all this with his own eyes and cannot believe how this is possible, just like the other passersby. But the man didn't like this test of strength. He was already about to attack him with his fists. Yuan grabbed his hand and asked him to be careful with his words, otherwise he would get into trouble too. Suddenly, he heard a female voice behind him and turned back. A girl he didn't know approached him and demanded that he leave her boyfriend and not touch him. The brunette rolled his eyes and looked at his friend, whom he brought here. It seems that what is in front of them now is Li Jujie's ex-girlfriend, the one who used him and dumped him. And now she begins to suspect that it was he who asked our hero to come here and deal with her boyfriend. The bespectacled man started to be rude to her and said outright that he thought she left him only for money. And the girl looks like this and doesn't hide it? She needs money, because there are quite a lot of children in her family, and no one can pay for her education except herself. The bespectacled woman can't believe what she's hearing. She's literally selling herself now, and that's definitely not human. Finally, the girl came closer to him and hit him hard in the face so that he wouldn't waste his words. Yuan decided to intervene in their conversation and grab this young lady's hand. Since her ex was now the director of his company, he would protect him too. Of course, the girl didn't believe it, and even began to make fun of him for looking like just an ordinary country bumpkin. The guy took out his black card and threw it at her feet. He gave her permission to spend $400,000 on the purchase of a new car. As for the rest, she will get them if she allows her ex-lover to hit her 3 times. The girl looked at him indignantly, wondering where he got such a large sum of money. In any case, she doesn't need to know the details after all, she's not from the police. Her new boyfriend insists that she agreed to the conditions, but the girl thinks about his proposal. And finally, the lady walked up to her ex-boyfriend and pointed her finger at her face, allowing him to hit her. The bespectacled man can't believe that she's humiliating herself for the sake of money. But in any case, she has no other choice but to get money for food. He swung at her with all his might and was about to hit her hard, to take out all his anger on her. The long-haired girl closed her eyes and simply froze in place, realizing that this would end someday anyway, and she needed to endure it. But for some reason, there was no blow for a long time. The girl decided to slowly open her eyes and see what was happening. Her ex-boyfriend froze in place, and now she is very angry with him because he didn't do it, and the boy just turned away from her. He began to move further and further away from her, and quiet sobs could be heard. The brunette gave her his card anyway, and demanded that she get out of here quickly. Her boyfriend came up to her and snatched it from her hands to check if there was really money in there. And now the girl understands who she lost, and mentally asked him for forgiveness. He walked further and further after our hero, and tears did not stop flowing from his eyes. Only our hero knows how strong his brother is, and he is confident that Jiang Ting will come running to him and repent. The bespectacled man looked up and smiled at his friend, thanking him for everything he had just done for him. The boy pulled the corners of his lips together and reminded them that they were best friends, and he definitely couldn't ignore these things. The guys decided to go to a restaurant and have a bite to eat there. But now Lee is very worried because there was no money on that card, and that guy's dad is a prosecutor and can easily find it. Our hero just laughed at his panic-mongering friend. In fact, there is quite a sum there. It's very hard to believe, and one might even think that Yuan was involved in something illegal. But even if that were the case, Yuan doesn't see a problem with it. As they say, scars adorn a man, and his friend supports him even in such deeds. The boy just laughed loudly, but asked his friend to eat faster because he needed to visit one more person today. The bespectacled man smiled at him and said that he wanted to know 2 more things, and that he should tell him about the guy he was talking about now a little later. The brown-eyed man looked at him with slight misunderstanding and asked what exactly he wanted to know. First of all, of course, as his future partner, he is interested in learning about the company's main area of activity and also about the startup capital. Brunette told him that the whole point was reselling antiques, and as for the money, it was about 3 million. He nodded his head and silently took the map. It was time for him to go. The boy smiled back at him and asked where he was going in such a hurry. He now needs to register with the Department of Commerce and Industry, obtain a license and open an account, and do many other things related to business. After listening to him carefully, Yuan began to worry that his friend might be rushing things too much. He still needs to get to know the market properly. Since he has such a chance, the bespectacled man wants to do everything in the best possible way. Looking at him, Yuan remembers their school years. Lee really was involved in brilliant startups right in the dorm from the very beginning of his studies, and it's very good that he recovered from his depression. And since their pleasant conversation was already over, it was time for him to hurry up. Yuan got up from his chair and looked around. And so, the boy has already arrived at the place and is looking at this tall building. The last time he was here when he was some kind of intern, it feels like years have already flown by. There is a man walking nearby carrying some kind of box, and it is clear that he is very nervous. The boys met each other's eyes and seemed to recognize each other. This guy is Liu Neng's lackey who stole his designs, and now that he's gone, everyone got what they deserved. Entering his class, the boy noticed a familiar girl who was in charge of everyone here. It seems that Headmistress Chin is very serious now, asking everyone to hurry up and pack their things as soon as possible. The boy opened the door and, of course, greeted her first. The blonde recognized his voice and turned around with a completely different expression on her face. The girl smiled at him and greeted him. The guys hadn't seen each other for quite a long time, but Yuan came to her right away on business. Madame took him by the hand and invited him to talk in her office. To make it easier for them to communicate, Chin provided him with a comfortable and soft chair. The girl also said that she had conducted an investigation and found out that the project had been his from the very beginning, and that Li Sheng had indeed stolen it for Nan. But that is already in the past. Now our hero came here for a different reason, and then the madam did not let him finish. Since he returned, the position of deputy director is now his. She would really like him to cooperate with her, and she just smiles sweetly, looking into his eyes. The boy was very happy about such an honor, but quickly refused, even though he had recently saved her life, and came to talk about something completely different. The blonde looked at him in surprise and decided to clarify what exactly they were going to talk about now. As for their cooperation specifically, it's high time to raise this topic. The lady tilted her head forward and asked what exactly they would be talking about now. And the brunette said that he would be selecting natural stones for their company. In addition, he will be responsible for cutting, whether jade or diamonds, but in any case, the revenue will be quite large. The headmistress remembers how he showed a shocking ability to select stones, but luck does not fall from the sky, and in any case, you need to think carefully about it. The boy came closer to her and asked her not to doubt him, and he even began to think about revealing to her the secret of the golden finger. The girl stood nearby and didn't even know how to react. It seemed that she began to have a crush on him. When the guy took her by the shoulders, Chin was confused and could not pull herself together. Our hero himself felt embarrassed by this and asked what she would answer to this. The girl looked him straight in the eyes and asked if she could ask him something. Perhaps she now wants to set some conditions for him, judging by the thoughts that the guy read. Of course, she asked if he was single or if he had an object of adoration. The brunette was a little confused and said directly that he was free. Look away! Director Chin touched his cheek and asked if she proposed to be her boyfriend right now. Would he agree? A slight blush appeared on his face, and he was confused for a couple of seconds, not knowing what to do. In the end, when the situation had already gone too far, Yuan gently took her by the shoulders and pushed her away from himself, because he did not come here to discuss such things, but to cooperate. The girl laughed awkwardly and asked for forgiveness because she couldn't control herself. He doesn't intend to dwell on this, and therefore suggests getting straight to the point. Of course, we need to discuss the terms. The girl wants to know the expected quantity of goods, consider cutting options, and set the price. Given her determination and confidence, we can say with certainty that this will soon be discussed at an official level. And finally, after this difficult day for both of them ended, it was time to take stock. Yuan had almost fallen asleep several times while waiting for her. The blonde told him with a smile that she was almost finished. Everything was in order with the contract, and now they could sign it. Moreover, now is a very good time to celebrate the beginning of their collaboration. Chin jumped up from her seat and suggested having a joint dinner in honor of this. Our hero happily agreed. It was a great honor for him. From such pleasant dreams, Chin became slightly embarrassed and even blushed. But she was very glad that he agreed. The guy took her to a restaurant, a very beautiful place, but quite expensive that even Madame began to worry. But our hero asked her to take this calmly and trust him, because here it was 100 times tastier than in all the restaurants she had ever been to. And even though the atmosphere here is quite calm, there are still ill-wishers who want to attempt on his life. Even the cooks already know our hero here and greet him with a smile, along with his new lady. Of course, the idea that this beautiful lady is his fiancée makes him blush, but he refuses to say so. Kwan herself sits nearby and hears everything, giggling quietly. It must be admitted that the headmistress was indeed very charming, but there was nothing remotely indecent in his thoughts. Suddenly, their pleasant conversation is interrupted by some unknown person who comes up and sharply grabs the guy by the shoulder, after which he plunged the blade into his chest. It all happened so quickly that he didn't even have time to move. Our hero grabbed him by the jacket and began to carefully look into his face. It seemed that this guy was quite familiar to him. The headmistress herself was confused and screamed in panic when she saw how badly he was injured. This is one of Liu Neng's people. He came to take revenge on both him and her. Because of these two people, that fat man lost his job. The blonde jumped up from her place and was only able to hit him hard in the shoulder so that he jumped back further. And she herself ran to her friend and tried to bring him to his senses. Tears appeared in her eyes when she saw blood flowing from his chest. Even the people around him began to worry about him and tried to find out what had happened. Our hero is still conscious. Yuan asked the director not to worry about it. The girl will never let him die and immediately calls an ambulance. Well, the cook asked her not to do anything stupid because the hospital is only a kilometer from here. He won't be able to wait that long, and they need to find people who can carry him. Many other people began to observe everything that was happening. Many assumed that it was all because of jealousy, without knowing the full situation. The lady looks around in confusion and doesn't know who to ask. All hope is on this man. But he also refused, because now he needs to look after the food carts. In the end, in order not to waste time, Chin took the boy on her shoulders and is going to carry him to the hospital herself. To make it faster, the girl took off her heels and didn't care that she was running barefoot on an uneven and rather prickly road. She's not just walking, she's running as fast as she can. It's very good that she's almost there and has to endure a little longer. The brunette grabbed her and asked why she was risking her life for him. Madame asked him not to waste his energy on talking, since they had almost reached their destination. The boy had already come to the conclusion that all this was because of money, and if something happened to him, he would not bring in any profit. But in reality, it's not about money at all. The truth is that since he saved her, she suddenly realized that there are feelings in life and not just money. And it is worth admitting right away that Chin sincerely fell in love with Yuan Hong, although it is not worth saying this. But she asked him to pretend that he did not hear anything. The boy still insists that she put him on the ground and not drag him on her back. The blonde was confused. She couldn't believe that he could survive if she didn't help him. And yet, in the end, he asked to listen to him and leave him where he is. It's obvious that even if the hospital is nearby, one of Liu Ning's men has set up an ambush there, and we need to be careful. And yet, even despite this, the headmistress sees no other choice. Because the wound is too deep, something must be done with it anyway. Our hero realized that it was useless to talk to her, and he simply slipped out of her hands. The blonde yelled at him. It seems that he does not value his life at all and does not monitor his condition. And the boy simply asked her to leave him alone. He now needed complete concentration and silence. Thanks to his abilities, his power began to concentrate around the wound and it began to heal faster. Apparently another ability of his finger. Just from around the corner comes the same guy who attacked him. He can't believe that our hero is still alive. As expected, Li Sheng showed up and Qin decided to talk to him herself, reminding him that she had recently paid him more than his salary. It looks pretty funny because she herself recently fired him, blacklisted him, and now he has nothing to live on. And in that case, he's going to deal with these two at once right now, since this lady won't let him live in peace. Just in time, the boy managed to get to his feet and hit him back so that he wouldn't dare do anything. The guy in the hood flew back quite far and began to rub the place where he received the blow. Of course, he was able to attack, but his strength had not yet fully recovered. And even though the killer was repulsed, he is going to attack again and finish his job, and again runs at him with a knife. The headmistress stood up for our hero, saying that he would only get to him over her dead body. And since it comes down to it, he is going to deal with her first and has already grabbed her by the hair, swinging his blade. Yen jumped forward and stood in her defense, looking his opponent straight in the eyes. He said directly that Li Sheng had no chance. No one would dare touch his girlfriend. Our hero punches him hard enough right in the face and the enemy's grip weakens. And finally, he falls to the ground, and the brunette pins him to it. Now is the time to call the police. It's very good that Headmistress Qin managed to do this first. Finally, our hero smiled, and then fell on the asphalt. He lost consciousness from loss of blood, and after his previous attempts to fight on, quite a lot of time passed, and Daredevil finally came to his senses and began to slowly open his eyes. He found himself at someone's house, and when he woke up, the first thing he saw was Qin lying next to him and sleeping. It's a very unexpected morning for him. He thinks that he is still in a dream. And so the headmistress wakes up, a slight smile appears on her face, and she wishes him good morning. The boy was confused and didn't know what to ask her first, so he sat and stuttered. The blonde hugged him and kissed him on the cheek, but he just froze in place and couldn't resist in any way. The girl remembered how he had said yesterday that she was now his. and it seemed that these thoughts were now haunting her. The brunette jumped out of bed and began to button his shirt to avoid awkward conversations now. These negotiations really went very terribly. Spending the night with Chin was also a deep wound. This was not how he had imagined this day. It seemed like the abilities of his golden finger were growing and growing every day, and a night had passed, and his body had indeed fully recovered. But in any case, now he is in perfect order. He would like to go to the antique street now and maybe even buy something. Yuan had heard a lot about her, but during his practice he had neither money nor time. But finally he had such an opportunity. There are so many goods and so many people here that your eyes run wild. Everyone has something interesting. But if you look closely, you will see that most of them are fakes, and there is nothing original. Suddenly, the brunette notices a Buddha made of black jade, which really interested him. The guy put his hand to it and began to conduct an analysis, which showed that this thing was indeed very valuable. Yuan approached the seller and asked if it was for sale. The bearded man smiled at him and nodded his head. However, before making a purchase, a certain condition must be met. The boy was a little confused and asked what exactly they were going to talk about now. If our hero needs this Buddha so much, he must buy a box, which costs 1 million in cash, and the statue itself costs 1 yuan. This sounds quite interesting, especially knowing that he wants to raise the price of some box several times more. The boy threw up his hands and asked what he was planning and why he was asking so much money for such junk. The man is not going to bargain with him right now, and if he doesn't like something, the young man can just take and leave. He needs a knowledgeable buyer. And yet, our hero agreed to make such a purchase. Only now he needs to go and withdraw money from the card. Come to think of it, Yuan could resell the Buddha for more than 1 million. Perhaps this old man is one of those who believes in the magical connection between things. Suddenly, a girl appeared on the horizon who gave our hero advice not to buy anything from this man, because he would already be the third loser. The boy looked at her nervously and asked if he had understood her correctly that the old man was deceiving people. The blonde nodded her head. She had seen with her own eyes more than once how he fooled others using the same scheme. And that is precisely why Madame advises him to abandon this idea right now before he goes broke. It was clear from this girl that this was not her first time here, and one could say she was a regular guest. Yuan decided to check with her about this. The blonde nodded her head and confirmed his suspicions. It is obvious that the guy didn't ask this just like that. He would like to offer her to become his guide, and in exchange he wants to show her how to buy this Buddha and not be deceived. The girl agreed, but in return, if he doesn't succeed, then he must give him some antique item. The guys came to an agreement, and our hero approached the impudent merchant and said that he brought the amount he owed. The bearded man looked at them and smiled from under his forehead. It seemed that their deal was successful. But before that, the boy still needed to open this box only when he left the street. The brunette agreed with a slight grin, and he was going to read his thoughts to find out what he was up to. In his mind, he was already mocking him that he had lost his million, that in the box there was an ordinary trinket, and he had a real Buddha. Now it becomes clear that our hero's new acquaintance was telling the pure truth. And in that case, the old man should not be surprised by his disrespect. Yuan began to squat down slowly and said that he had heard that his eyesight was not quite right and offered to help him check the money. And he himself deliberately dropped the box that the man was holding, and Buddha fell out of it. He took it unnoticed and asked forgiveness for being so careless with such a valuable antique. And while the grandfather hadn't noticed the setup, he suggested that the girl leave here as quickly as possible. But our hero miscalculated because he still had assistants, and the deceiver noticed that he had taken the wrong thing. The boy turned to him and grinned slightly, asking what was the matter. The bearded man clapped his hands, looking intently into his eyes. People appeared around him, surrounding our hero from all sides. He will of course be able to leave, but he will have to leave Buddha here. The redhead initially thought that Yuan had some kind of plan, but it turns out he just decided to take the statuette and ended up in a terrible situation. The grandfather began to laugh loudly and repeated that the impudent man should now return the Buddha to him and not run away. A slight grin appeared on the guy's face. It seemed like he wasn't afraid at all. And now the grandfather only had to guess how many seconds it would take him to take out all of these guys. The lady is at a loss. She cannot believe that her new acquaintance is only amused by this situation, and asks to give them the Buddha and return the money. The old man began to laugh even louder. It seemed that the young man wanted to play the hero, but he would not receive any money or a statue. His men began to attack him, throwing around words about how he had dug his own hole. While all these bandits are attacking him, Yuan only thinks that he needs to control all his strength. Otherwise, he will beat them half to death. One of them thought about taking the girl hostage while our hero deals with the others. He had already managed to kill the very first bully by striking him straight in the stomach. From the other side, the next one attacked him, but he managed to dodge. But Yuan didn't notice the blonde, and he had already grabbed the girl, threatening that she would be harmed. Of course, only the weak like them act like that. And while the boy was distracted by them, he received a strong blow to the face from one of those guys. The old man was already standing nearby and saw everything, saying that at this rate, society would teach him a lesson more than once. Well, who said that everything could turn out quite the opposite? That he would teach society a lesson? Yuan stood right in front of them, grabbing the old man by the throat, demanding that they let the girl go. The bearded man had already started coughing, but he still insisted that his people really release the hostage. The blonde snorted in displeasure and let go of the girl, who jumped back from him and grabbed her throat. Our hero looked at her and asked if everything was okay with her. The girl only coughed, but said that everything was fine with her. And of course, as a final touch, he decided to give them a little present by throwing his grandfather at them. The old man flew straight at the crowd of men, and with one blow knocked them all down at once, since they were unable to think and catch him. Our hero grabbed his girlfriend by the hand and decided to get out of here as quickly as possible. The girl froze in place for a couple of seconds. This was the first time the guy had taken her hand, but there was no time to think about it now. The boys ran very fast, but it's very good that they were able to run to a place where they are now safe. The blonde cleared her throat and looked further at her friend, who apologized for getting her involved in all of this. But for her, it's nothing to worry about, and she's not even angry. The only thing that bothers her is that they still haven't taken Buddha. They also haven't returned the money. Perhaps she should go back to the police station and ask for help. The boys snorted in response. If that's what they want, then let them go there themselves. But Yuan had already managed to take it for himself. His plan was so brilliant that he did it so quietly that no one noticed when he threw the old man at those guys. He didn't even think that he would feel the statuette in his pocket. That's how it turned out that he was in the black. The schoolgirl smiled back. It seemed that his mission here was over, and she would no longer be able to appear on this street, at least because she had exams ahead. But Yuan didn't know that she was still studying at school, and he wondered if she was doing anything on the antique street. As it turns out, this is something like her hobby. She only needs to look at the product to understand whether it is fake or genuine, and this time the girl also trained. The brown-eyed man looked her straight in the eyes and asked if she would continue to be interested in this after the exams. Madam sighed heavily. Her parents think that she is wasting her time and that it would be much better for her to go to university instead of doing this. Of course, she has other plans. Although she is older and partly right in the guy's opinion that higher education is important, there is still something in which they were wrong. After university, you will need to think about your own life, about earnings and career, and what will happen then. The girl hasn't looked that far into the future yet, and therefore doesn't know how to answer this question. It's unlikely that she will be happy. To keep the schoolgirl from being sad, Yuan gave her a Buddha and asked her not to give up the work she loved. After that, the boys simply got ready and left. The red-haired girl looked after him and thought about his words. Before finally saying goodbye to him, she asked him what his name was. But even here, he will not answer her, because the name is just a conditional one for him, and if it is fate to see each other, then of course they will cross paths again. The brunette understands perfectly well that he should be a mentor for people like her, but he also likes to make fun of people, and of course for that he just got a good slap on the neck. The blow was quite strong, although she looked like an ordinary fragile girl. The redhead immediately made it clear that such tricks wouldn't work on her. She needed to know at least his name, not to mention his number. The brunette looked at her and asked what she was going to do next since she couldn't just accept this thing. And then she realized that she really had nothing to offer, and she had been too hasty with her statements. But Yuan was also in a hurry, and probably put her in such a position that it would be necessary to somehow hush it all up. The brunette slammed his fist into his arm and said bluntly that he now had an idea of what she could offer him in return. After these words, she seemed to glow and asked how she could help. He wanted to joke with her and suggested one option to lighten the mood. After listening to him, the girl was a little confused and didn't know how to react to it, to which Yuan only laughed in response. And yet in the end, he decided to leave his contacts, since she understands antiques. In addition, the girl was promised that there would be an opportunity to show herself in the future. And before saying goodbye, the boy waved his hand to her and asked her not to follow him. Even though he looked strange to her, he still gave her contacts, and perhaps the guys will be able to collaborate in the future. When Yuan had already moved away from her, he remembered today. There were really a lot of adventures here, but he didn't buy anything. His thoughts were interrupted by a phone call, and he immediately picked it up. The boy heard someone's familiar voice. It seemed that someone had very urgent business for him. When he came home, he immediately informed Xiao that he would need to leave for a couple of days. The long-haired girl seemed offended at him for constantly being away and leaving her alone at home. But in any case, she must understand that founding a company takes a lot of time, and he needs to discuss it with many people. But in reality, he will not say that he is going to Zhou, otherwise he will receive a portion of jealousy. The girl looked him straight in the eyes and said directly that she could go with him to accompany him and perhaps she would be useful to him. Yan looked at her and asked her to look after the house better. But unexpectedly for him, she pounced on him and began to grumble even more that she wanted to go with him. The brown-eyed man picked her up in his arms and told her directly that she would be getting underfoot, and it would be best for her to stay at home. The girl agreed, but in return she asked for his strong hugs. When our hero arrived at the place, Zhou was already waiting for him, and it seemed she was very serious this time. The girl looked him straight in the eyes and said that this time she really had no choice. She had to warn him. The boy was already confused, but still asked her to tell everything as it is. The girl asked him if he remembered how he helped her solve problems with Gao Duyuan last time. As it turns out, the whole thing is with Mr. Yuanji, and it is he who is worrying her now. About a week after our hero left, he came to her family to ask about him. The guy looked into her eyes with confusion and asked if he had asked for information about him. As it turned out, he was very worried. And at first she thought that he wanted to lure Yuan to his side, but he simply went and shut down her family's entire business. If you think about it, since a person can stop the business of an entire family at will, then it is clearly not as simple as it seems. Besides that, yesterday, his people said that if the girl doesn't provide information about him, he will destroy their entire family. He doesn't care that it's against the law. Moreover, Z told her that if he came, he would tell her where his father was, after which our hero even shuddered. The boy certainly didn't expect such a turn of events, and asked Jojo if he had said anything else. The girl looked him straight in the eyes in confusion and just fell silent. But Yuan's gaze fell on the car. It looked damn expensive, and it looked like there was someone in there. The blonde looked at him and invited him to sit down with his mistress. The man began to ask our hero whether he had spoken with his daughter about all these matters. The brunette told the truth, however. He still didn't understand what the man wanted from him. As it turns out, he himself still doesn't understand at all. But Ji is waiting for him at the best hotel in Nanyuan. It is obvious that this situation is very unfavorable. The guy decides to take an observation position, since doing anything is not an option yet. The girl turned to her father and said that no matter what happened, they were obliged to protect Yuan Hong at any cost. The man smiled sincerely. And since our hero helped him that time, he is incredibly grateful to him. The Tseng family really does not know how to express their gratitude to him. And at that moment, the driver interrupted their conversation. The guys had already arrived at the place. The guys found themselves in a rather luxurious place. This hotel is really incredibly big and beautiful. Perhaps things are not so good. The boy became wary, but the man asked our hero to go inside. A girl met them at the threshold and greeted each of them with a smile on her face. The young hero felt very unusual when he was called sir. But it was very nice that even young people were treated with respect. And now, despite everything, Yuan is ready to go through fire and water to get information about his father. 3 people had already met him in the office and greeted the other guests. The man introduced Yuanji himself and the others present. The girl with big and incredibly beautiful green eyes smiled at him, and it seemed that she found him attractive. The young man introduced himself and greeted the older and younger generations. The other guys appreciated his friendliness and politeness and waved, but the lady began to mentally grumble to herself about the fact that no one was even looking at her. One of the men introduced himself as Li Feng. He was only a couple of years older than him, and since that's the case, the age difference doesn't bother them, and they can speak informally with him. Their acquaintance went quite well, and now they can speak frankly. Feng looked at our hero and said that everyone here was a respected person in the city, and therefore, the boy would only need to answer one question, but only honestly. Of course, since that was the case, Yuan agreed. But those people also needed to know that he needed information about his dad. The men came to an agreement among themselves, and everyone was happy with everything. One of the old men looked him straight in the eyes and asked what his mother's name was. It was a very strange question, and he said outright that her name was Li Chu, and that she died last month. For some reason, deep down in our hero's soul, a very strange feeling appeared, as if he was planning something. And indeed, the man mentally said her name again, and it seemed he found what he needed. It's clear that he's very worried, but the purpose of all this is still unclear. Then he asked if she had left him anything as an inheritance. Perhaps it was some antiques, torn pages, or even books. The brown-eyed man folded his arms across his chest and said directly that there was only the first option, but there was nothing else. Perhaps he knew about those pages of the basic Taiping techniques. The old man thought about it, and it seemed to him that he was definitely lying, because the gentleman had given the page to that woman as an engagement gift, and they literally could not exist. The brunette became wary and began to think over all the words he had mentally spoken. Now he was even more interested in his connection with his mother. The men sat in silence for a couple of minutes, simply looking at each other, each with their own suspicions. Now it becomes clear that this man definitely knows something about his father's affairs. The bearded man asked our hero to think again carefully, whether there really were no pages or something like that. Yuan continued to stand his ground and confidently said that he had already answered all his questions. And now it seemed that it was his turn to ask. The girl Zai looked at him dissatisfied. She could not believe that he was talking to the gentleman like that. Perhaps they had some kind of relationship with each other. The other guys came to the man's defense, saying that our hero should be much more polite and answer all his questions first, and then listen to the answers to his own. The situation becomes much more suspicious because they are simply exchanging information. And what is the age difference here? The boy looked at the old man and asked if he could answer his question right now. The blonde also looked at him sideways. It seemed that he had already formed a not very good opinion of him because he had no position and was so rude. And yet, even in spite of all this, the grandfather decided to give him the right to vote. The brown-eyed man looked at him and asked directly if his father was alive. The guys sitting nearby even froze and began to guess who this man's dad was. To which the man smiled and said that he was still in the world of the living. In principle, this is all that the boy needed to know, and he prefers to simply ignore the next questions that they ask him. Rising from his comfortable chair, he turned around and walked towards the door so that they wouldn't bother him anymore. One of the negotiators jumped up and even raised his voice at him, saying, "He can't just up and leave now." The brown-eyed man stopped and asked if they owned the place. The man calmly put his hands in his pockets. He must still have questions. It is very surprising that they do not want to answer this question, but in any case, it will not be difficult to find out where his dad is. The most important thing is that our hero knows perfectly well that he is alive, and this is quite enough for him. This person with whom he just met has a high position and is also acquainted with his father, which means that most likely he is of the same status. Everything is very complicated. He is more concerned about why he did not visit his own wife when she was sick and in serious condition. Unfortunately, his strength is now very weak. He has no status or even money. But still, even despite this, he gives himself his word that he will find it someday. When suddenly he heard that there was someone behind him, and it was his familiar green-haired girl, and it seemed that she was driving straight towards him. She stopped the car right next to him and asked where he was going, and if he wanted, she could even give him a lift. But the boy refused and decided to go on foot on his own. What is insulting to her is that she doesn't even want to visit him. The girl jumped out of the car and walked straight up to him, hugging him from behind. Everything became clear from her right away. She had an even worse desire than Director Chin, and he certainly wouldn't fall for something like that. But without knowing why, Yuan ended up in the car with her. Jo Mei immediately got behind the wheel, and the boy asked why she was so attached to him. The girl sighed heavily and said that there had been a lot of unrest in her house lately. The brown-eyed man became wary and decided to find out what exactly was wrong there. As it turned out, the girl bought an antique canvas, and that's where it all started. After this purchase, strange things started happening to her. Sounds of water coming out of nowhere, things falling on their own, as if some kind of mysticism. The boy became wary, and the very words about this frightened him. That is why our hero decided to go to her home and see what was going on there. Madame showed him the room where this canvas was hanging. Yuan gently touched the lips on it, when suddenly, he was pulled back. Mei grabbed his hand and asked him not to do it. Looking anxiously from him to the portrait, our hero raised an eyebrow slightly and looked at her sideways, wondering what he had done wrong. In fact, the girl is very afraid because she constantly thinks that the person depicted there is alive. The guy just laughed in response and said that if she was so scared she could easily go into another room. That's exactly what she did. And the guy didn't give up trying to touch her again. Having tuned himself in, Yuan put his hand to the portrait to conduct some analysis. She didn't have any special abilities. This thing was painted with special specific paints that have a strange condition, and it was precisely this that was able to hook the boy. He looked at her for a long time and could not understand what the matter was. Suddenly, at that moment, Mei came up to him and asked him to leave already, because the tap had opened on its own again. The brunette rolled his eyes in displeasure and asked not to touch him like that again. But he himself was going to go check in the bathroom. And indeed, the water flowed by itself. He decided to examine it much more closely and even grinned. He said it was broken from the start, and it even made him laugh. It would be best to replace it now and wait for the plumber to come. And Yuan also decided to ask how much money she spent on this painting. She had to pay almost 2 million for this. The quality is certainly not one of the best. His thoughts were interrupted by Mei's scream. She pointed her finger at the painting and began to walk back. Red spots appeared around her eyes as if she was crying blood. Of course, our hero is brave and decided to first approach her and see for himself what was going on. The girl grabbed him by the shirt and asked him not to leave her alone, looking straight into his eyes. Our hero simply looked at her with slight misunderstanding and didn't even know what to say. Meanwhile, Madame simply jumped on his back, clinging tightly. Yuan Hong simply sighed heavily and decided to use perception to conduct an analysis. As it turns out, paints have spiritual qi, which means that they play a bigger role than the painting itself. A rather interesting artifact, which our hero really has his eye on. Now he wonders if this spiritual energy will be able to awaken new abilities in his finger. In just a couple of seconds, the guy absorbed absolutely everything that appeared in that picture, and now it's like new. And besides, it became clear that there is nothing unusual. And apparently, if you want to awaken a new ability, you need to have something that is not inferior in level to Tianwen. The green-eyed girl looked at him in surprise. She couldn't even imagine that the bloody tears would disappear so quickly. As he thought, there is no mysticism here. These were not bloody tears, but just a specific cinnabar. The dampness is to blame for everything. And it was this that influenced the special cinnabar, which turned into a liquid. Now everything fell into place. The girl thanked the guy for his help, because she would not have been able to stand being in this terrible apartment for even another day. And since the problem is solved, the guy wants her to get off him as soon as possible. The green-eyed girl looked at Yuan and asked him to carry her to the room excitedly, because her legs had become a little weak. That's why he sighed heavily and still decided to fulfill her whim. And soon they arrived at the place. The girl laughed and simply fell with him. She was very grateful that he helped her. For everything he did for her, the green-eyed girl kissed him. But Yuan wasn't particularly pleased with such gratitude. He would have liked to just go home already. Just in time, he was saved by a phone call and the girl was distracted by it. The guy was very happy and asked if she was going to, but for some reason Gudok did not stop walking and Mei jumped up from her seat. Our hero just laughed and offered to answer anyway. The girl nervously picked up the phone and asked who it was. As it turned out, Mr. Yuan was calling her, and at that very moment the tone of his voice changed to a more polite and quiet one. And now many questions have appeared in our hero's head. For example, why is he calling her so late? The girl said that she was with our hero right now and looked at him slyly. The boy found this very suspicious, but he decided to stay on the sidelines and watch what would happen next. Their conversation did not last long, and the girl soon stopped chatting with him and hung up. After this, Yuan decided to ask directly whether it was Ji or not, and our hero turned out to be really smart. The girl appreciated this and said that he immediately asked to extract a fragment of the main typing tactics from him. The brown-eyed man said that there was no need to even waste energy on this, since he didn't have anything like that at all. Yuan continued to insist on his own, but the girl turned out to be quite assertive, and it looks as if she does not believe him. She shows too much interest in him, and is not even embarrassed to say that she only needs him now. The guy sighed heavily and asked, since when did she start treating him so well? Was it all because of her connection with the Yuan family? As it turns out, he was right. There is some benefit for her from this. Of course, she can do whatever she wants now, but it's interesting that his hero's attitude towards her is zero, and that is why he suggested talking to her about something else that could bring at least some benefit. Brunei wants to talk specifically about how big the Yuan family from the capital is. The girl just smirked, saying that he would soon find out everything himself, and without her help, it was definitely not worth ruining the whole mood now. The only thing that can be said now is that she is equal to a titan, and one of the four that has a huge impact on the world. Yuan thought about it. It was really hard for him to hear her say that. The girl laughed, because judging by how Z treats him, one can assume that he undoubtedly has blood ties with someone from Yuanye. And if you think about it, then he has every chance of becoming a person with great connections. But the guy has something else, and it's true that turning everything upside down is quite difficult. Green-Eyed was confused and decided to clarify what exactly he was talking about. Specifically, we are talking about the fact that he wants to remove UNG from his position with his own hands, and nothing more. But Mei certainly didn't expect this turn of events because she doesn't think it's bad to inherit family property, and it's all about his father. He ignored his own son and his wife, to the point that he left her to die without help when she was on the verge of death and did not even look in her direction. It is very difficult to call such a person a father. The girl even felt sad from these thoughts and she sighed heavily and became quiet. In any case, he is not going to forgive him, no matter what. Besides this, the guy is sure that after these words this woman probably abandoned him. And what a pity that from the very beginning she contacted him because of the name of a family that has nothing to do with him. Suddenly, Mei stopped him unexpectedly and said that she had a few more words that she wanted to say. According to her, the boss initially gave him the task of seducing and luring out the main tactic. But she was not going to do this because she thinks that they also know about it, and therefore they have a backup plan. The brown-eyed man smiled back and asked what she meant by that. Of course, no one was going to seduce him, and the girl just laughed. It's all about the male tricks that can force him to give up this fragment himself. In order to enter the market, the Yuan family used all possible means, such as beatings, robbery, kidnapping, and the like. But in the case of our hero, he may be mocked even more than others. The mere thought of it makes him feel disgusted, and he decides that he really does need to take care of his own safety. The madam smiled and asked him directly if he knew Gu Wu. He probably met him once before, and this man is really very strong. He showed himself very well in that ring. The madam winked at him and said that it was indeed enough to just have good physical fitness to win, since all the clans from the upper crust of society mostly come from there. And this time, in order to learn more about him and the main tactics of the typing, the family sent another person. The hero was slightly confused and looked straight into her eyes with slight interest, wondering who it was. His name is Yuan Qi. He is an ordinary offspring of Yuan Shi. Although he belongs to the aristocratic youth, nevertheless he is the only disciple of Qingzi, and one of the four clouds of the Qingcheng sect. But even though he is like that, our hero is not afraid of him at all and therefore pulls her hand away from himself. The girl finally said that she didn't need anything from him, and in parting, she thanked him for helping her find out the reason for this mysticism. The boys smiled at each other and said goodbye, waving their hands to each other. Mei looked out from the balcony at him and followed him after her. This is her game in life, to capture everyone who arouses interest in JoJo. Meanwhile, the boy is already on his way. When the dark night came, instead of lying around the streets doing nothing, he decides to go to Tseng. He called JoJo and agreed to talk to her about something in person. The girl met him in her pajamas. It was late and she was about to go to bed and therefore was a little unhappy. Our hero smiled back at her and felt a little embarrassed, but went in anyway. For him, such a meeting was unexpected. He thought that the girl would stay at the villa and could not expect that they would see each other again. As it turned out, her house is located not far from her small shop, and therefore she can take care of him at any time. Yuan only smiled in response, sipping a cup of tea. And it's surprising that Yuan, during all this time, the absence of our hero did not create any problems for her. And all thanks to him. But now the girl has other personal experiences in her life. Longhair is thinking about marrying her father, and the thought of it makes her a little irritated. The brunette looked at her with interest and asked how many children the man had. And as it turns out, it's only she and he who want to set her up on a blind date. The boy smiled in response and dared to assume that he was indeed from the Wen family. And he was right, but Jojo doesn't like his name. She even shivers from it, just from its mention. As soon as his friend mentioned Yuan Qi, he became wary. This was not the first time he had heard that name today. The girl stopped for a second and still decided to ask her friend for a favor. Specifically, Jojo wants him to introduce himself as her boyfriend and help her in this matter. The girl really doesn't want to get married, especially to her father. And since it comes down to it, Yuan just smiled and advised her to talk to him. But unfortunately, as it turned out, everything is useless. And for them, everything comes down to quarrels and scandals. The blonde sat down next to him and asked if she should listen to him or marry the one she liked the most. The brunette sighed heavily and said that it would be best to really choose a partner that she truly liked. And that person would be very lucky. This is exactly where Jojo needs help. And if he agrees, then everything will be fine and should go smoothly. Yuan slightly raised an eyebrow and asked what would be the outcome for him if he agreed. Of course, we are talking about a monetary reward. A slight smile appeared on the lady's face. And of course, Yuan is only for it. 2 million are not lying around on the road. He literally beamed with joy. It's very offensive that in front of her now is a guy who is really very greedy for money, but the girl still doesn't take back her words and promises to give as much as he said. In the end, he agreed to help her, but saw a displeased grimace on her face. She can't believe that he is so obsessed with money, because there are still many things in the world that are much more important than this. Of course, this is true, but if you don't have them, then nothing else will happen at all. The boy still blames himself for not being able to save his mother. The girl noticed that he was sitting sadly and decided to at least cheer him up a little. To his surprise, she simply kissed him without saying anything, after which she added that this could be considered as interest on top of that because he helped her. Yuan just froze in place and continued to stare at her. There really was a strange atmosphere in the air. The boys looked at each other and just laughed, without saying anything else. The girl sat up straight on the sofa and said that tomorrow her father would definitely arrange a meeting for her with Yuan Qi, and they needed to discuss a plan of action. It all sounds pretty simple. You just need to play along with her and keep her company. Now everything depends only on our hero. If they are not believed and everything looks unrealistic, then they are both doomed. Meanwhile, the guy himself is interested in meeting this person, who has been constantly on his lips lately. The next day they were already together, like a real couple. And besides, the place was very suspicious for a meeting. Although our hero reassures her, he himself believes that they are facing a difficult opponent, and that they will have to work hard against him. And finally they arrived. This man was already waiting for them and greeted them with a smile. The girl immediately frowned. She couldn't believe how he could be so frivolous here. Of course, he immediately moved on to complimenting Jojo's appearance, and looked at her with a smile, examining her from head to toe. The lady became very angry and asked him to show at least a little respect. His guard agreed with her words and insisted that he deign to return to his place. The brunette continued to mutter something under his breath, not even listening to what they were saying to him. When he moved away, Jojo pointed, not with her fingers, and said that he was the man they wanted to marry her to. Our hero asked her to calm down, because they were here to ruin everything. And it was important to think of this as a small scene at the moment. Madam can't stand such rich kids, and it's obvious that Yuan Hong is many times better than him. The boy is already looking at these two with interest. Yuan Qi himself does not seem like a powerful person, but his bodyguard radiates a completely different aura. The guy himself tries to seem kind, offers her something to eat, drink, whatever she wants, and is even ready to buy this place for her. She refused him in a rude tone. No one in their right mind would want to receive anything from him. The boy just laughed. There are a lot of girls around him who, if you give them something, are in seventh heaven and are already ready to hang around him. The blonde just raised an eyebrow. She had come across a very shameless guy. He looked at the month of Cheng and asked how she could allow the bodyguard who was accompanying her to sit next to her. Our hero was confused when he was called that, and even slightly lost the power of speech. Well, if he doesn't have such a status, then Yuan is very interested in who is standing in front of him now. The brunette rose from the table and greeted the man, intending to firmly shake his hand with a smile on his face. He introduced himself as the guy Jojo and looked him intently in the eyes. The man froze in place and didn't even know what to say. It's really funny that a young lady came here on a blind date with a guy, and of course he didn't believe that they were a couple. Frowning, the blonde reminded him that she had been against this marriage from the very beginning, since she was already taken, to which he only responded by laughing loudly, so loudly that some covered their ears. And at that very moment, Yuan Qi literally threw the table at which they were sitting together at her. A glass of drink flew at the girl, and she simply covered herself with her hands in surprise. Luckily, Yuan Hong was able to catch him, and now he will be the one chatting with this man. and it seems that Chi does not take into account at all that the girl is already taken. In any case, he has already decided that she will be his today. But he threatened our hero to leave here quickly, otherwise he would regret it. But for some reason he is not afraid at all. Not even at all. He continues to tease him. The man swung his fist at him in anger, trying to hit him. He really doesn't like it when people make fun of him. The blonde was confused and asked her boyfriend to be much more careful, looking at the two of them with concern. But Yuan Hong managed to catch him and reminded him, as if he was telling a small child, that swearing was not good. His opponent is not going to retreat and wants to attack again. But unfortunately, he underestimated our hero, and he was able to throw him away from himself quite strongly. It seems that Chi is not the only one here who knows martial arts, because an ordinary person would not have been able to strike like that. And so Yuan decides to ask him what school he is from, trying to find his balance on his feet. The brunette looks straight into the eyes of his opponent, and now his tactic is simply to fool him. Without thinking, he said that he was studying at the Kunlun school, taking a fighting stance. This made Chi freeze. This is the same school of mystical martial arts that is indifferent to worldly affairs. And now, quite a lot of questions appeared in his head. And since it comes down to it, he wants to know the name of his young friend. Smiling slightly, Yuan Hong named his real one, but when it was the mentor's turn, he was interrupted. He was very surprised when he heard it. And out of surprise, he asked again if he had heard correctly. Our hero can easily tell him who he is, and there shouldn't be any problems. In any case, it's definitely over with the son and the rich family. At that very moment, a smile appeared on Chi's face, which began to develop into laughter. It seemed that in front of him now was an illegitimate son, who even had the courage and impudence to come here. The brunette frowned and advised him to simply keep his mouth shut and not spread lies here. But it looks like he himself doesn't know who his father is, and it seems like his mother didn't tell him anything about him during her life, which is why he started laughing even louder. And the boy realized that the person standing in front of him was truly not an easy one, and he himself began to feel angry at him. At this moment, a girl intervened in the argument. She walked up to Yuan Chi and hit him hard in the face. He jumped back, and the lady stood up for her supposed boyfriend. No one has the right to insult him. The girl grabbed him by the hand and led him away from that place. It's not worth taking the words of a person like him to heart. The cocky guy smirked in response. No woman had ever dared to hit him like she did. He ordered his subordinate to prepare a good number for them. In addition, he was given orders not to let these two out of this room, and he immediately blocked the path for both of them. The guy with the golden finger looked at him, and his skills were indeed worthy of praise. He was quite fast in his movements and dexterous. Before starting the massacre, he suggested that the master leave, but Seng must stay, and there would be no way out for her. The blonde frowned and looked him straight in the eyes. She doesn't understand, since when he decides everything. And the reason is simple, that Hooligan wants to take her as his bride as planned earlier. The girl started walking backwards, but accidentally collided with that bodyguard. In any case, Ta was not going to stay here, and in order to knock her down, the man had to swing at her and aim to hit her fragile leg. It was a good thing her boyfriend was there and could protect her by blocking her with his foot. He looked him straight in the eyes and said that it was a very cowardly and not even manly act to attack a woman. But he began to justify his behavior by saying that he was simply following orders and that it didn't mean anything. Our hero will be able to hold them off for a while, but in any case, he asked his girlfriend to run away from here as quickly as possible because he won't last long. Jojo looked him straight in the eyes. She was very scared and she didn't want him to leave her alone, and therefore, she didn't want to leave herself. The brunette sighed with displeasure and rolled his eyes. She was just getting in his way now, interfering with their showdown. Just while they were chatting, the boy didn't notice how this bodyguard managed to get close to him and was already preparing his kick. It's good that he has very good reflexes. Yuan Hong deftly grabbed his girlfriend in his arms and squatted down with her so that she wouldn't get hit. For literally one moment, their gazes met. The girl blushed, and he just looked at her, smiling. Now it's time to get out of here, and our hero asks her to run as quickly as possible. The man is not going to retreat. Even though there is a girl among them, no one will get out of here. The boy will still be able to hold it off for a while, but he still won't last long. While he was holding Rougeau in his arms, he couldn't fight at full strength. Yuan Hong was almost exhausted, and after a couple of seconds, he puts her back on her feet. The girl noticed his heavy breathing and began to worry. It doesn't look like he can lose now, but he shouldn't discount his opponents either. They turned out to be much stronger than he could have imagined. Even Yuan Chi himself didn't expect that her bodyguard could fight normally, and even stand on his feet, which amused him greatly. As it turns out, his protector is the #1 student among the youth of Qingcheng School, which is worthy of praise. The bespectacled man ran closer to his opponent to strike, but still thinks that he is being praised too much. The boy ducked and managed to dodge his attack, but still watched his movements. Even though he is so skilled, strong, and his speed is still not enough, Hong was able to dodge his planned attack and get too close. And not only that, but I also managed to push this student quite far away from me. His boss orders him not to make any concessions but to give it his all. This time he uses the leg of torment, something like a magic trick. To be more specific, this is chi energy, which our hero certainly didn't expect to see. Luckily, the boy managed to block it and protect the girl. The only thing that happened was that his shirt was torn and his hands were covered in scratches. But still, doubts arose in his mind that it was exactly what he thought. Yuan froze in place. But the girl was less lucky. Almost all of her clothes were torn. Her boyfriend looked at her in confusion and asked how this could have happened, since he had definitely protected her. According to her, she felt a strong wind, and her clothes began to tear as she walked. He carefully took off his shirt and gave it to her for a while. Ki energy is really very powerful. It still creates a residual wave of air currents, even if the attack is parried. The master himself stepped aside and began to think about everything that had just happened. He had given it his all and would not be able to use this trick for at least an hour. There was silence between them, and it was worth admitting that Yuan Qi was indeed good for something. And since there was a girl here today, he would not be considered by them. And if they still wanted to fight him, Hong promised not to retreat. In fact, our hero heard everything they had just thought about. And in fact, there is a powerful ancient martial art in front of him now. He needs to see more. The two froze in place and simply looked at him in silence, occasionally exchanging glances. Now, since they don't want to advance, the two of them should leave this place right now. Yuan Hong kicks out the glass and is about to jump. It's very good that it's not very high here, and the landing was soft. The guys got ready and moved on. When they retreated as far as possible, Yuan Qi became very angry. He didn't expect that they would come across such a strong opponent. It seemed that the next time they met, they would really have to give it their all. Our hero turned to Jojo and forced her to call a taxi as quickly as possible so that she could go home in peace. But she is now more concerned about the condition of her friend, who has suffered the most here, and she suggests calling an ambulance. It's very good that he's okay. It's just that the energy has entered his body and he needs to catch his breath a little. The girl looked him straight in the eyes and asked if he might need Uncle Gun's help. He agreed, but only when he returned home. His girlfriend finally helped him find home. It's great that everything ended well. May was already waiting for them, and the first thing she did was look at our hero with concern, nervously wondering what had happened to him. It's very good that the chi energy didn't affect the internal organs, and all that remains is to bring it out. The boy was very lucky to get off like that, but he will still need some time to study ancient martial arts or find a few ancient items to level up on his own. When the brunette came out of his room, he saw that only May was sitting there and his injured friend was not with her. As it turned out, she just went to take a shower, and besides, her clothes were torn and she needed to tidy herself up a bit. The whole situation looks rather suspicious. Two of them were injured, and the girl is interested in what happened to them. The guy calmed her down and said directly that they just came to meet Yuan Qi, where everything happened. The green-eyed girl was confused and looked at him in surprise. She couldn't believe her ears that this actually happened. Our hero fell onto the bed and added to this that they even managed to measure their strength, and the only one who is quite strong is the person he keeps with him. May was even more surprised by his stories. She couldn't believe that the two of them had managed to escape from him because it was impossible. He was considered the most worthy martial artist in Sichuan among the younger generation, but most likely, this person deliberately lost the game. In addition, the guy does not trust this woman and decides to simply test the waters. And yet, Madam can't believe his words because Tsun has always been famous for his composure. And that's why when Qi gave the order, he couldn't let them go. Our hero has nothing else to say. He told everything as it is, and now he is most interested in why she came here. The girl said directly that she had heard something very important and knew that he would be right here, and that was why she wanted to see him in person. And this morning, as it turned out, she met 3 authoritative people in the city of Nanyu. They told her that Qi sent 3 of Qing Cheng's masters to deal with our hero. Yuan Hong even jumped up from the sofa at these words. He didn't expect that a whole assassination attempt had been launched against him, and it is very likely that this time they will try to take away what he has at any cost. These words made the boy think. They play quite cruelly, and it was very good that he accompanied Jojo to the meeting today. Otherwise, they both would have been in danger. Just at that moment, she came and asked which masters they were talking about. There was an awkward pause between them. The guys just stared at each other and watched silently. And at that very moment, the blonde remembered that she had forgotten to change her clothes and ran into another room. Her savior looked at her and just smirked, wondering why she was either very surprised or very worried about him. And May herself looked at him and still could not believe that a boy like him could so easily get out unharmed, and that he was clearly different from the other boys from his family. Although this was not surprising in principle, given his own strength, Madame sat closer to him and looked straight into his eyes. It seemed like he looked too thoughtful, and at that moment she wanted to get closer to him. Just now, Jojo came to them, and seeing them in this state, she looked menacingly at both of them. Our hero calmly told her that it was just a grain of sand that got into his eye, and the girl helped him get it out. Seeing her menacing face, he repeated the same thing again, but he felt much more awkward than he had said it the first time. The blonde crossed her arms over her chest and said that she didn't care at all what Yuan Qi was doing, and it seemed to her that quite a few days had already passed, so from now on, Hong was obliged to follow her. He obediently nodded his head and said that he would do absolutely everything she said. The green-haired girl came closer to her and asked if it was really worth handing over this guy to her as a bodyguard. The girl still didn't understand what she meant and asked her to explain it to her in a much more specific way. Mei said with a smile that it was a lie that she would marry her this time, but that they needed to catch Hong, who was sitting next to them, was the pure truth. Our hero only sighed heavily in response. He was already too tired from all of this and just wanted to rest. The boy suggested that she just not think about it. He understands perfectly well that they are here only for her, and in the end, he will help her in any case. After all, they are friends. Jojo even took offense at him after these words because ordinary friends can't kiss. Moi looked at him and had an idea that she might be having some kind of affair with this guy and was going to get him tonight. She crossed her arms over her chest and began to look at the two of them, because now that the question was open, it would be much more dangerous for the two of them to stay. And when the two of you stayed together, they might fall into a trap. It's hard to disagree with her, but that gentleman doesn't know where she lives, just like her father. But even if so, the location will be fairly easy to figure out, and therefore Mei believes that our hero should distance himself from them for a while. And he himself agrees with this, because in the end, their main goal is himself. But still, people like that guy, I don't know if there is a need to attack Zheng Ruoru. And besides, he wouldn't want to be in his debt again. There was an awkward pause between them, and at that very moment the brunette had an idea. What if Zheng went with him? Mei immediately objected, this should not happen, and besides, it will not work according to her. The guy carefully took Jojo's hand and thanked her for reminding him of everything. Now he wants to find suitable housing for the two of them and leave the housekeeping to her. The green-eyed girl looked after him and didn't even know what to say. Emotions were raging inside her. Meanwhile, the guys have already chosen a place to settle. It's unlikely that anyone will guess. They came to the hotel where his friend works. She had already met him and asked where they would like to stay. The guy asked to give them 2 rooms, preferably next to each other. But as luck would have it, there was only one left. The woman smiled slightly. The young people felt a little awkward, because it seemed like this lady decided that they were a couple. And that's why he decided to ask again whether she was definitely not mistaken. Even Jojo herself was embarrassed. She didn't really like the idea either. It's surprising that she's against it. According to the woman, others just want to settle in this way. In any case, nothing could be done. The guys began to climb up the stairs to get to their room. And on the steps, they noticed one man who was smoking and walking nearby, staring at all the passers-by. But at one point, he pulled out a cigarette and greeted Jojo, smiling slyly. Our hero took her hand and asked her to simply ignore it, not to pay attention. He still continued to look after them and grinned, as if he was planning something. The blonde grabbed Yuan and asked him to quickly move on. She really didn't like the situation here. And finally, they came to the room. The girl took out the key and opened the door. The first thing that caught my eye was this single bed. Everyone thought there would be 2 of them, but it looks like they were wrong, and you can see how Jojo became very uncomfortable. The boy shrugged his shoulders and had already decided to go and take off another one so that everyone would be comfortable. The blonde was confused and still asked him not to worry about it, because the woman said that only one was free. It was surprising that she was still worried about him today. Hong even felt a little embarrassed. As soon as the boys reached the end of the corridor, they saw the strange man they had met on the stairs. He looked up and noticed that the young lady was left without a room, and a smile appeared on his face. The old man began to stretch out his arms towards her, and of course, the boy stood up for her. He would not let anyone harm her. He just laughed menacingly, threatening that he would really get into trouble if he did that. But it seemed that Yuan Hong was not afraid at all. He hit him in the chest with a trick. The man flew to the side and began to rub his nose. The brunette threatened him that next time it would be much worse if he dared to show himself to him again. The old man rose to his feet and was about to leave, but promised that they had not yet fully sorted things out with each other. The blonde was already waiting for him near the entrance to the room and asked him not to pay attention to people like him. But he has a completely different character. He can't just take it and allow himself to ignore such people. These words only made Jojo feel embarrassed. She was very pleased that they stood up for her, and now it's time to sleep. But Hong chose to spend the night on the floor so as not to embarrass anyone. But the lady doesn't seem to agree. It even sounds somehow wrong. But Yuan still insists. He will be able to feel it if someone suddenly comes in, and she will definitely have a peaceful sleep. Even though the boy doesn't consider himself a gentleman, he still can't allow something like this to happen, especially when they are in great danger. Suddenly, he felt the earth shaking and jumped up from the bed he was trying to make. It looks like uninvited guests are coming for them, and they should prepare themselves. The blonde was confused and asked who it could be. Yuan Qi would hardly have been able to figure them out so quickly, but most likely it is this group of those gangsters that annoying old man called. And he was not mistaken. Several men rushed towards them, and they were armed too. One of them asked in a rude tone, who dared to raise a hand against his brother. Yuan Hong covered the girl with his body and asked her to go hide somewhere until he dealt with these guys here. It seemed like one of them had already set his sights on her, and a smile began to spread across his face. The men began to whisper something to each other and even laughed. Their boss praised them for their good work, and he promised to treat everyone to a cup of soup, so to speak. The boy and his girlfriend frowned and carefully watched their every move, which made them feel simply disgusted. And now, the bald one and the others are going to show where the crayfish spend the winter. Of course, Hong was not going to hesitate and would fight. He swung his fist and hit him in the face hard enough that he did not have time to react. The fat man flew into the wall, not even having time to deliver a counterattack. He crushed several of his own people with his body, and they ran to his aid, anxiously trying to bring him to his senses. Our hero told them that he would remain alive, but only on condition that he lay peacefully. His other friends can't just leave it at that, and are already threatening to beat him up, preparing their weapons. 3 guys immediately rushed at the boy, one with a club, the second with a knife. The third also took some kind of blade from his pocket, but just one blow from Yuan was enough to take them all down at once. There was an instant silence in the room. They all fell to the floor and seemed to lose consciousness. Their leader, an old man, looked at all this and could not believe his eyes that all his people were defeated at once. Our hero looked at the others who were standing to the side and asked if they could repair the door. At that very second, they put it back in place, and there it stands again, like new, even shining. He praised them for the work they had done, but still decided to let them go. The fat man, who was the first to arrive, approached him and smiled, calling him brother. Our hero simply slammed the door, saying that, in principle, they could be considered friends. When the door closed, he became furious. Now Lao Tzu definitely needs to develop. The bald man looked at him and asked what he was talking about, since he had clearly rejected them. He hit his friend on the head because he doesn't seem to understand that friendship with a person like him is real luck. And now he gives orders to everyone else to prepare several people to guard the hotel so that no one disturbs the young master. Jojo herself, whom they already tried to attack once, feels terrible. She always runs into bad people. Our hero asked her not to worry about it. It's all over now. He himself is thinking about Yuan Qi from Paints Island. Madame lay down on the edge of the bed and decided to listen to him more attentively. Hong looked at her and said that in any case, hiding all the time is not so cool, and most likely these guys will definitely find her anyway. But the blonde doubts this, because her father knows many people from this city, and therefore he will not go there to commit murder. Anything is possible, even though it won't be a crime. There's a big risk that he could ruin her business, just like Yuan Ji did. It's important to think through a plan of action now. Literally a couple of minutes of silence passed, and our hero didn't even notice how he fell asleep from fatigue and found himself in a very beautiful place. The sky was strewn with stars, and some unknown girl appeared. She was walking straight towards the guy. He was a little confused and didn't even understand who it was, and went to meet her to take a closer look. She gently touched his face and began to peer into it, but he could not see her face clearly. Yuan Hong wanted to touch her too, but she was like a ghost. His hand passed right through her. After this, our hero woke up and began to nervously look around. The dream was indeed very strange. He immediately noticed that he was not sleeping alone, as planned, but with Jojo, who had fallen asleep next to him. The brown-eyed man was slightly confused and stared at her. He didn't even have time to notice when she managed to land next to him. It's a shame that she probably thinks he's so frivolous, but for some reason lately he's been drawn to her. The girl sleeps so sweetly, he really fell in love with her during all this time, and no longer wants to think about anything but her. And so, the blonde woke up, and our hero pretended to be asleep to see what would happen next. Zhou was very upset that she was born into a family where her fate was already decided, and she looked sadly straight into the guy's eyes. While he sleeps, she can sincerely tell him about her feelings. She really loves him, and gently strokes his face. But on the other hand, she cannot allow her father's hard work to be simply destroyed by her, and since it comes down to it, she decides to manage her own destiny. And besides, she knows perfectly well that Hong is not sleeping. And indeed, our hero jumped up from his seat and asked her not to behave in this way. But this time she doesn't care at all. She just doesn't want to be so withdrawn anymore. The blonde came up to him and simply kissed him. This time, Yuan Hong decided to reciprocate and did not push her away. So the boys fell asleep. The moon was already full, and the stars appeared in the sky. Our hero woke up again and for some reason started staring at the ceiling. For some reason today he has a headache. He jumped out of bed and carefully rubbed his temples. Turning his head to the side, he saw a note, but his lady was not there. He carefully unfolded the piece of paper and read that her heart would belong only to him. Now everything becomes clear. Ruoru has started to act, but this time the boy will not allow him to act alone. Meanwhile, where Yuan Qi is, there is too much noise, and there is a quarrel between him and his subordinate. The woman slipped him some sour grapes, but in her favor she said that they were bought only that morning and delivered from another city. Their taste should be simply neutral and not as terrible as he described it. The Chinese man narrowed his eyes and became angry at her for daring to contradict her master. His bodyguard swung his foot at her and hit her hard on the head, and he just sat there and smiled. What irritates the guy most is when he is ignored. Servants should have the consciousness of servants, and not be like her. The blonde looked at him and asked what he thought about changing another one. The guy smiled at his friend Zeng, saying that he only needed from him her, who must appear right today. Otherwise, from now on, there will be no place for her in the city of Nanyu. It turned out that he had already contacted Roru, and she was probably already on her way. He just needed to wait for her. The guy looked around and asked how much time would pass before she arrived. "Half an hour would be quite enough now," as one of them said. The day has finally come when the Zeng family will be razed to the ground. Uncle Gong heard everything and frowned, but said nothing. Jojo's father is already asking for a little more time, promising that she will return soon. One of his subordinates slapped his knee and declared that such a thing was not even negotiable. At this moment, Uncle Gong Yi comes in. It seems that he is not in the best mood right now. He saw how he was lying. The blonde grabbed him by the shoulder and stopped him. He had no right to stand in front of three gentlemen. However, in the end, Yuanqi felt that even half an hour would not be enough, since she would not return, and he might have to deal with the Xing family directly. But just at that moment, a female voice was heard, quite familiar, and Jojo decided to come to him herself, no matter how much she didn't want to.